officially discontinued or not officially discontinued. If you can't buy it, it's effectively dead. That's pretty much what we said. And that's pretty much what we're hearing. So that's unfortunate for people, but that's what we're hearing.
And welcome to Broken Silicon, a gaming hardware podcast. I am your host, Tom, and today's lead sponsors are Wondershare Recover at V14. Get a free trial through the link below, and also cdkeyoffer.com, where you can get Windows 11 Pro for just $24 with code Broken Silicon. And today, I am joined by somebody who probably needs almost no introduction from fans of Moore's Law, and especially in the past week, I would say. But Happy New Year. Please introduce yourself.
Hey, it's Tim here from Hardware Unboxed, back again. Yeah, you probably have seen some of our recent coverage of GPU supply sort of stuff, but yeah, Hardware Unboxed as usual. Monitors Unboxed as well. Can I promote that at the start of the content?
Yes, and I made sure to put a link to that too in the description.
Cool. Well, anyway, it's nice to be back. Nice to have a chat. Happy New Year as well. We're in 2026 now. I think I made a mistake in my previous video and I said 2025 accidentally. That usually happens at the start of the year, so yeah.
I don't know if I've done that audibly, but I can tell you I've named like a bunch of invoices, random files that I've been working on 2025 still. Like yesterday I did. And I noticed that something I sent a week ago was labeled from the previous year. You brought up Monitors Unboxed. There's something I wanted to ask you just kind of as an opening question here. Like, what is your favorite part of working at Hardware Unboxed? Is it reviewing opinion pieces, monitors? I mean, a dozen other things.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly prefer the product testing stuff. So whether that's the monitors or testing, like new features, new graphics features, that sort of stuff, that's the most exciting thing. I'm not a huge fan of the sort of reporting side of things. Like news reporting or trying to investigate different things. I tend to see myself more as a product reviewer than that side of things. But I mean, it's all part of the job, I guess. But yeah, the favorite part is definitely testing products, analyzing them, and coming up with recommendations for people. I think that's, definitely the best.
The Paradox, he writes in and says, this question is for Tim. Can you rank these 5 things in order of difficulty? Building a PC, gaming on Linux, netting a cherry tree. I don't know if that's an inside joke with you or something.
I think I mentioned on our podcast at one point. So yeah, I've got a cherry tree.
Oh, okay. Listening to a keynote about AI or finding a good 1440p monitor for less than $150. And as always, too, thank you for your wonderful content.
Right. So, I mean, finding a 1440p monitor for less than $150 is probably the easiest.
I agree. I found one right before we started recording.
Yeah, those come up pretty regularly. I think, we've seen some ones from like ASRock, Dell around that sort of price. Next up, I mean, netting a cherry tree is not that difficult. You sort of just get up on a ladder with a net, throw it over the tree and hope for the best. So that's pretty straightforward. These days, I mean, building a PC is not like a challenging task, like physically putting it together. But obviously purchasing parts is pretty difficult. And then gaming on Linux, I mean, that's obviously better than it's ever been, but still has issues playing some games. And then by far the most difficult, I don't know whether you listened to any of the most recent keynotes from CES, but listening to a keynote about AI is just like, I feel my brain just disappearing out of my head because it's just that boring, vapid, garbage content. It's unlistenable. So that is by far the worst.
I will say that on like big CES keynote days, sometimes I'll like play the worst offender, especially in the last few years. NVIDIA's keynotes, just as background noise in case I see something interesting. In fact, the most interesting thing that I wrote down from NVIDIA's keynote while I was working on something else at the same time was that he said a lot of weird phrases. And I was like, you know what? This is my takeaway. This is like, I think I had in my video, I'm like, and here's what I think of NVIDIA's conference. I just played the 3 like weirdest things Jensen Huang said. So I think it's very good for making you concentrate, like as like a background noise, because there's really nothing interesting I ever hear in the AI presentations. I mean, I would say that maybe it was more interesting this year because you can tell they're trying to convince people that it's not a bubble. Like the previous few years, it was just all marketing nonsense, and it's still mostly that. But I noticed like they were spending like whole 30-minute things of like people like you can tell who seem defensive going, and we're using it for this, and we're using it for
Mhm.
this. And there was someone definitely, or all of them said behind the scenes, this year we have to make sure we tell people you can actually use it for something, which I think is still up for debate.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I mean, yeah, it's just not a fun time listening to that. I mean, we're at this consumer electronics show. It should have been about
Hmm.
consumer electronics, those most recent ones. But I mean, it's not the first time we've seen keynotes about AI. So yeah.
Yeah, that was my most critical thing about AMD's keynote as well. As I mean, uh, cool, you showed off Zen 6. You know, it looks cool, but really, you couldn't have like teased Medusa APUs or like this is the consumer electronics show. There's plenty of time to show off Venice in the future. I thought it was honestly very weird.
Yeah, well, didn't they announced the 9850 X3D, but it wasn't in the keynote as far as I'm aware. Not that I was paying
I
100% attention.
I think the 9850 X3D, I think it was for like 5 seconds. I mean, I think they may have gone, also, we're doing this, and then they kept going. And of course, there wasn't the 9950 X3D too. There was just
Mhm.
like an RDNA 4 like situation where everyone seemed to have it, but couldn't say they had it. It is very weird.
Mm.
All right. Well, the first thing I wanted to bring up is unsurprisingly something you already touched on, which was the report that you at least voiced in the video about Nvidia throttling GPU supply. And I'm very curious, just in your own words, from your own perspective. You know, I'm sure people have seen headlines, but like, explain like how did this come about that you heard about this? What made you want to talk about it? And just summarize the whole kind of thing from your perspective.
Yeah, sure. So essentially, it came up by coincidence. We really weren't looking into making a report on GPU supply or anything. We have a lot of off the record conversations with people at places like CES and other trade shows, but we don't generally do that sort of reporting. But basically, Steve was wanting to do some more roundups this year. The thinking was that the lack
Mhm.
of the Super Series GPUs, whether that's delayed or cancelled, not 100% sure, but they're not coming anytime soon. So we thought, well, if you're going to be spending a lot of money on a GPU, you probably want to know which of the AIB models is the best. So we were going to start with the 5070 Ti, or at least Steve was going to start with that, and reached out to all of the AIB partners to get in the samples. And, we saw some comments of people being like, oh, surely you already have 5070 Ti's. Well, we do, but not all of the AIB models. So to do a roundup, you need to test the cooling performance, the actual performance of the cards and stuff. So that's what we did. And a lot of them either just didn't really come back with too much or said things like, we're just not wanting to participate right now. But Asus actually gave us a reason. And they said that there's no supply of this model, or supply is very constrained. And therefore, Asus's models are going to be placed into end of life status. And so,
Mm.
because this is an email with an Asus PR representative, it's an on the record statement from
Mhm.
Asus. And so we thought that was quite weird because, it's sort of unusual reasoning to be told that a product is going to be end of life, or at least, and to be clear, what I mean in this sense is Asus's models. So the Asus Prime, the Tough Gaming, those sorts of cards, those are end of life products within Asus. That was our understanding. Then we confirmed that with Asus. So sent them another email. Again, this is directly to Asus's PR representative on the record. Hey, so, you said the 5070 Ti is end of life. Is it end of life? And they're like, yes. So, I mean, that's a definitive statement. There's really no ambiguity there. It's not like we were talking with, because we know people that
Yep.
aren't just the PR representatives at Asus. We can talk to people in the GPU divisions and stuff, and generally get more anonymous type sourcing or off the record, not to be reported type stuff. But this was an Asus PR representative, so
And they said it
they
twice.
said it
I
twice,
mean,
and so we thought, oh, okay, that's weird. So then, obviously we need to get some confirmation, because it could just be some sort of, I don't know, isolated or just wrong statement from Asus. So we thought, okay, well, the best way to do that is to check the actual supply situations. Let's have a look at retailers, and just publicly you can see the stock levels, and Asus cards were probably one of the more difficult to find among the AIBs. And then check in with retailers, and they obviously know more future looking stuff into like what their supply is going to be looking like in the next couple of weeks and months, like that when they're ordering in cards, like how easy that is to do. And what we heard back was that that model and several others in the line were going to be very difficult or basically impossible to come by. Um, the retailers are very interested in purchasing cards. So this isn't a situation where they're sort of like they've cooled off a bit. They don't want to buy 5070 Ti's
Mm.
and stuff. They told us they're trying to buy everything basically, but just that you can't really purchase that model. And so, yeah, those two things combined, when you sort of get an on the record statement from a PR representative of the largest NVIDIA AIB, and you're sort of hearing from retailers that you can't buy these cards, yeah, we should probably let people know that Asus has made at least their models end of life and that, these cards are going to be pretty difficult to come by. So that's why we made the report. That's really what happened. And then, of course, Asus later, after we published that, decided to backtrack
Got a
on that.
spanking from Daddy Jensen for saying that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Asus to begin with seemed like they wanted to make it clear to us that Nvidia hasn't made their card end of life. So Asus was sort of passing the message on to us that Nvidia is saying this card isn't end of life, which of course falls short of saying Asus hasn't made them end of life, because there's two different things that can happen there. Nvidia can still technically keep the model in supply in a certain way, but you know what I mean, right? Like it's not officially discontinued.
Officially, it still exists is really the most accurate way you can put it, because it doesn't even mean they're necessarily making more. They're just saying this is our current product we support.
Sure, like yeah, discontinued means that they're not bringing it back. It's done, it's dead, etc. Whereas Nvidia is always going to say, and they're not going to come out and say, yeah, so we secretly discontinued that model. No, they're just going to say like, yeah, we're still supplying that GPU. That's exactly what they did say. Everyone should have expected that. The key thing was Asus, the partner, saying, we're not making that card anymore because we can't get the supply in. And then, of course, they backtracked on that by claiming that they actually are still making that card, directly contradicting what they told us originally. And of course, there was a bit of kerfuffle there with people sort of saying, well, you heard this as a rumor from a random Asus employee, and then they made this PR statement that was official on their website and stuff like that. Well, we got told both things from this. We got told literally both statements from the same person. So it is literally the same company giving two contradictory statements. But, when Steve and I were discussing this, we sort of predicted internally that this would play out exactly as it's played out, because once you make a statement like this, sort of saying this guy's end of life, it's pretty obvious that Nvidia would be upset with that, pretty obvious that they would be refuting it, and that they would come back and sort of say, well, it's not technically end of life or whatever they want to say, but I mean, my interpretation was that the card, at least the information we got told originally, is effectively what has happened. So they were telling us effectively this card is end of life, like we're not really able to make this anymore. So internally we're thinking of it as an end of life card. Don't know why they told us that on the record. That's their mistake, I guess. And then later they have to say, well, technically speaking, it's not, we might be able to bring it back at some point, but I mean, realistically, it doesn't sound like there's any supply. So that's the situation, really.
And that's Asus, and you said that's NVIDIA's biggest AIB, saying we are end of lifing it here. Because if they are doing that, it's like, oh yeah, sure, Asus is the only one who's deciding to do that, their biggest supplier. Like if it was, I don't know what other weird GPU companies there are, Austar, was like, we can't get any 5070 Ti supply. It's plausible it's because NVIDIA is not giving them some, but maybe they're giving more to Asus and MSI. If Asus isn't, I mean, that means probably nobody can get supply.
Yeah, I mean,
common sense.
Yeah, it's a combination of factors as well. Like if Asus told us we're not making these cards anymore, but then you look and they're just sort of broadly available, easy to come by, it's not much of a story. Like it's not really worth reporting if Asus is saying that. That's just Asus being weird.Maybe they're making more 5080s or something. I don't know. But sort of we'd already reached out to all of the AIBs and weren't getting too much back as far as like 5070 Ti's. And to be clear, this isn't like normally it's difficult. It's like when it comes to us getting samples for roundups and things, it's usually pretty easy these days. Like they will just send all of the various models. And it's not even like motherboards where they have to send like maybe 10 to 20 different models. With GPUs, most of the brands only have, within one specific SKU, they've got like 3 or 4 models. So usually it's pretty straightforward to get those in, usually no problem. So the fact that none of the AIBs were really able to or willing to participate, and then Asus saying that on the record, and then the retail situation as well, where you can sort of look online, speak to people in retail, sort of saying, well, it's not really just Asus that, we're not able to purchase, but, all of the AIBs, like we can't go to an MSI or a Gigabyte or a Pallet or whoever and order in tons of 5070 Ti's. The situation is there's virtually none. And of course, to be clear, we talk to retailers in our region, maybe different in other regions. But I mean, you can look pretty clearly at retailers across the world and sort of see the supply situation. And, some people have blamed us for making the 5070 Ti prices go up. But I mean, if they were really being made, you'd see them resupplied pretty soon, I would have thought.
I mean, look, it's like your video performed well and it should have, but it's not like we saw 1 billion views and everyone instantly bought it because you said that. And I think people overestimate the amount of power even something that gets shared a lot can have, versus what would have to happen on the other end to actually make that happen. And when I look at while you were talking, I just checked 5070 Ti on Newegg, and it's like doubled in price in a week or two. I think this already pretty much confirms what you said. Like it's right there. And I find it very bizarre because, there's a decent amount of outlets that I think were smart enough or maybe honest enough to say Hardware Unboxed says this, and then they go, Nvidia claims this, because that's really what it is. They claim this. After seeing, at least I put out a report, 5090 is going to be effectively EOL. I mean, expect $4,000 5090s. Nvidia puts out the smear campaign. 2 months later, it's $5,000. I mean, so we've already seen this happen. So I find it very bizarre that there is that much pushback when you can not only check what happened with similar reports before, but also just look at the 5070 Ti has doubled in price already. I think this kind of proves it. I mean, isn't that odd in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, it's the statement that Nvidia's made is not odd to me in the sense that it's exactly what the company would say.
We knew they would do that.
And, I'm not surprised that people have sort of taken their word for it because that's what people do with companies for some reason. The reality is the reality, and companies are always wanting to paint things in the best light. So whether it's Nvidia, Asus, and we've seen this even with, Radeon cards in the past where AMD would come out and claim, oh, you'll be able to buy one of the 9070 XTs at MSRP like within a week from now. And then it turns out that's not really possible. You might be able to buy like one or two, and then most of them are well above that sort of price. So, the reality is, and the proof is in the supply situation. Like if this card is being manufactured as, Nvidia is sort of attempting to imply, sort of suggesting we're still supplying this GPU. It's like, okay, well, that's not a statement that is just wishy-washy. Like you can prove that by seeing whether you can buy one within the next couple of months. Like I know they're sort of saying that there's supply issues and stuff, but if you can't buy a card, whether it's officially discontinued or not officially discontinued, if you can't buy it, it's effectively dead. So that's pretty much what we said, and that's pretty much what we're hearing. So I fully expect that you won't be able to purchase that model and the 5060 Ti 16 gigabyte anytime soon. So that's unfortunate for people, but that's what we're hearing.
Yeah, and I already told you before we started recording that I was delayed because someone called me, and I guess what I'll say is this person is in distribution, and added on to what they are seeing right now. And I'm not gonna say anything super specific yet because I believe I'll hear a lot more next week. And it's like, well, I might as well wait for the I's to be dotted before I talk about this again. But what I will say is so far it's if anything looking worse than what you said and then what I said, and it's worse than that. Like it sounds like Nvidia has fundamentally overbooked their AI contracts, and that if you want an Nvidia card, I don't know. I don't think you'll be able to get one for MSRP until maybe the end of the year. Like it's sounding quite bad. I would wonder, I don't even know what else to say about it. Like right now, I wonder how this will look though, if all of the cards do dry up in a week or I guess a month. And then Nvidia's like, no, but they're still there. Do you think there's any point where people look at that and go, Yeah, well, clearly this was right. Like, and clearly in the future, if Nvidia or any of these companies says something, like maybe we should not just immediately take their word for it.
Well, I would have thought that the cryptocurrency era would have, made people be a bit more suspicious of some of these claims. During that era,
Mm.
this is basically a repeat of that. I mean, companies were saying all sorts of things back then that weren't true.
The Fortnite boom. Yeah.
Yeah, when it comes to things like supply and stuff, and the usual one that we see that's obviously garbage are things like there's just overwhelming demand. It's like, well, if you supply 2 cards and there's 10 customers, yeah, there's overwhelming demand, but it's not necessarily means overwhelming demand in the sort of more broad general sense, because clearly this issue with supply today is not caused by overwhelming demand for gaming.
Yeah. Why now? It's not the Christmas season anymore.
Yeah,
Like, why would it be right now?
it's not like, oh, suddenly there's a whole influx of gamers wanting to buy these cards. No, it's because there's no supply. That's the problem. And yeah, demand's above supply, but the explanation is supply, not the demand side. And that has been the case previously. I think even Nvidia claimed this at the start of the 50 series when, again, you weren't really able to buy cards at MSRP for a while. And they were sort of saying, well, demand's really high. It's like, yeah, okay, sure. But also there's no supply of those models. So yeah, I mean, we've also heard from retailers things like the supply situation is pretty bleak for the price of the models that they can actually buy. So when you say things like the MSRP is not going to be achievable, yeah, I mean, I think the MSRP is pretty much dead. Like, I don't expect that to be a thing this year, and that was always going to be the case just because of the VRAM price issues. Like, a doubling of GDDR memory costs was going to make these cards $50 to $100 more expensive across the entire line. Therefore, the MSRP would be dead. And they're not going to subsidize that. So I know they're going to claim that they will, but they won't. So that's the current situation. So yeah, I'm not surprised that you're hearing similar. Yeah, MSRP cards are going to be not really a thing. And hopefully there'll be some cards that are still like okay value, like they won't be hugely inflated because
like a $650 9070 XT or something like that.
I mean, I'm not sure. Maybe it'll be $700 or something.
I think I'll be more eventually.
The 5090 being $4,000 is, obviously that's not related to memory prices. It hasn't, 32 gig of G7 isn't suddenly costing $2,000. So, yeah, but hopefully things won't be too bad. They'll be bad, but not that level across all models, I wouldn't have thought. But again, you never know.
Yeah, the only other thing I'd add on to this is I wrote down two other things, which again, it's already been said, but I just want to reiterate that AMD has no plans to restrict supply of their cards. Having said that, that doesn't mean they're ramping up more production. And they're like, well, I mean, we've already bought our production with TSMC. So what they plan to make this year is still only pretty much what they're going to make, which means that those certainly will go up in price for that reason alone, but a lot of those might sell out as well. It's something I've explained many times to people, like Nvidia cards, they throttle supply, you can't buy them. And then a month later, AMD cards go up in price and people are like, well, what about that? And it's like, well, if Nvidia's like 80% of the market, then if 80% of the market goes away, and that's being generous to AMD, then 20% cannot fill the market. In fact, to fill the market, AMD would have to tuple production, which is just unfeasible. So I would also warn people that, like, I think obviously AMD will be a better situation, but I wouldn't be surprised if those start becoming hard to get eventually as well, with how bad I believe the supply is going to be this year. And again, and I say that based on I've heard it's actually maybe even worse than what I heard before. Like, it's going to be Nvidia overbooked AI orders, and that is all they care about this year.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing too was, I was told by someone in distribution, like, everyone knows about this. Like, this isn't some secret that you can't get a hold of cards. I mean, you said yourself too, you called it multiple retailers. And I do think I would just say that to anyone who would like maybe comment like, well, could you ask this person, or maybe this person got something wrong? And it's like, to everyone listening, everyone knows. Every retailer knows this. Every distributor knows this. Every AIB knows this. This is like an open secret that Nvidia is like not supplying cards this year. So there would be no one else to ask. It's not like, oh yeah, I asked that one intern, or you, Tim, asked that one intern, and I really should have thought to ask someone at a retailer if they're hearing the same thing. It's pretty universal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it seemed like ASUS didn't really want to Like their first communication with us after the video wasn't like, yeah, so that was wrong. Uh, because obviously if we publish, like, because we got contacted afterwards by other people at ASUS, like other
Sure.
PR people in various different places saying various different things. But basically, if it was that one person just got it like 100% wrong and was just like way out of line, immediately we would have received an email being like, well, so that was wrong. Sorry, guys. Like our PR team said that was wrong, but it took them multiple different attempts of saying different things to get to the position that they're now currently in. So yeah, I think most people are very aware, and yeah, just the vibe of obviously visiting AIBs and stuff at CES. They know that it's going to be a difficult year for GPUs and for PC gaming in general, just because a lot of these brands like Asus and MSI, Gigabyte, they don't just make graphics cards, they make a lot of other products. And so anything affecting that is going to affect the motherboard division. That's going to affect all their coolers and power supplies because people aren't going to be gaming as much. And so, yeah, these companies are sort of in real time adjusting expectations to where things are at. And so everyone's sort of aware that, it's not going to be easy to build a PC this year. And so they need to adjust and change expectations. And that's what they're doing.
Yeah. And I would say too, like, it sounded like you and Steve were a bit surprised how quickly someone at Asus officially said this thing to you and then said it again. I would suggest the reason they somewhat surprisingly were so open about this is because of how much everyone knows behind the scenes. Like, well, yeah, like that, because that's almost the inflection I got from asking some people. Is like, not like, oh yes, I've heard this. It's like, duh, yeah, Tom. And I'd suggest that's maybe why they told you, is because they didn't see it as a secret at all. I mean, that has to at least be true to a degree.
I don't really understand why it needs to be a secret. Like, I don't get why there's all this secrecy around the supply of graphics cards. Like, who cares if people know that they're in lower supply? If you've got a reason for it, like, it's not like people are going to be like, oh my god, let's burn down Nvidia because they're not supplying GPUs. If they come up with a reason for it, and there is a reason, memory prices are insane right now. It's hard to get memory. There's a legitimate reason. Maybe it's inflated by other business interests in Nvidia, but they can just say like, yeah, sorry guys, but like we can't produce the number of cards we wanted to produce because of memory, and everyone knows about that situation. So I don't really know why they need to have this sort of facade that like, yeah, we're still producing all these models, but then everyone knows that they're not because you can't buy them. It's like, just it's not a situation that requires secrecy. It's just honesty makes a lot of sense. And yeah, in other industries, right, at my local grocery store, sometimes, there's been adverse weather events, and so you can't buy bananas or something because the banana crops were destroyed. The banana manufacturers don't come out and be like, no, we're still making bananas. And then everyone's like, well, where are they? Like, I can't buy them. And they're like, no, we weren't affected by the
thing everyone knows about.
Everyone knows that the crops were destroyed, but like we're pretending that you can still buy them. It's like, no, they say you can't buy them, and that allows people to adjust their expectations. It allows people to plan a bit better as well. If people know like it's going to be hard to buy a GPU now, they might change a few things about their plans for building PCs. But if people are sort of expecting that, yeah, these cards are going to be easily available, yeah, I don't think that really benefits anyone. And yeah, the secrecy just isn't required. So it's really dumb, that whole situation. Like, just be honest. And I think Asus were, in the original statement, trying to be honest with us, as sort of giving us a reason why it wasn't possible to supply a GPU. It's that they didn't have any. And that's a perfectly reasonable reason. So yeah, anyway.
No, but that's like another example I could give is like in the middle of last year when all these tariff wars started, Audi announced, we aren't shipping these models of car to the United States because we could never make money on it shipping these models. They didn't go, oh no, we're still shipping these cars you can't buy, even though there's an obvious reason we wouldn't be able to. I've never it is very weird and in many ways unique to this space. And I've been annoyed by this sort of thing all the time, but I don't even know where I would start. Like, why not just, like Intel, if you're not making a product anymore, say it. AMD, if you can't supply something, say it. Nvidia, if you just like, the reason people are going to be mad is that they can't buy the graphics card they want. Well, that's going to be true either way. So I don't really see the downside to just saying AI is more important right now. We are not done making graphics cards. We just are pausing for the next few months or whatever. And I think that actually might comfort people more, because then they would just go, oh, okay, yeah, so maybe I'll just wait till Christmas. I mean, maybe that's what they're trying to avoid. Maybe they don't like the idea that people wouldn't pay extra sooner, but I don't really buy that, actually. I don't know why.
Yeah, I mean, the Nvidia isn't necessarily going to benefit from cards being inflated in price anyway. It's usually the AIBs and other people that are making up
Exactly.
the price on the
Yeah.
supply. So that doesn't really make sense. I mean, I find it weird as well. Like, you know, these companies are obviously making tons of money off AI, and they believe it's sort of this future technology that's going to be the cornerstone of civilization or whatever. And yet, you know, they're scared to sort of tell gamers that, you know, AI is more important. It's like, well, do you believe AI is more important? Because if it is, then you'll easily be able to sell to gamers like, yeah, sorry, but you know, AI is better than gaming, or AI is more important than gaming. That's what we believe, and therefore, you know, we believe this is true. So that's the it. But the fact that they don't really want to tell gamers that is like, it's a little suspicious to me. It's like you're trying to sell this one thing, and then you sort of come into gamers being like, ooh, we don't really want to tell the gamers that like AI is kind of ruining the gaming thing for them. It's like, well, surely it shouldn't matter if AI is as important as they're saying. But anyway, that's just an issue that they've got. Yeah, sort of communication.
Yes, it might also suggest that they're afraid to say AI is more important because they don't think people will necessarily buy it the way they might portray it.
Oh,
But
they definitely will buy
Technolab,
it. But it's like, as a
yeah,
company, if you truly believe in something, then it shouldn't be a problem. So anyway.
makes you wonder if they do. This piece of content is brought to you by Wondershare Recoverit V14 and their AI-powered data recovery tools that help you restore files on macOS, Windows, or really anything, like even an SD card from a broken drone, with ease. Via AI deep scan technology with device-specific programming, it can specifically and quickly find corrupted footage or pictures and reconstruct them more efficiently than ever before. And also often to a higher quality than you might think. It doesn't just repair broken images, but enhances blurry and low images after they are repaired, and even gives you back your metadata as well. It is very easy to use and supports one-click recovery of videos and picture files, and the repair of unplayable videos as well, which, let me tell you, there have been broken silicon recordings in the past where only a part of a guest video was corrupted, but it prevented me from watching more than like a minute of the video. And in the past, I had to actually jump through a few hoops to find a backup cloud recording, and if that wouldn't have worked, I would have been in a lot of trouble. If I had Wondershare Recoverit at the time, that could have just fixed the file and I wouldn't have been in any trouble. And you know, they also have exclusive support for Apple video and image codecs, full compatibility with macOS 26 ecosystems, and full creative design project file recovery for apps like Final Cut Pro and Photoshop. So if you want to support Moore's Law is Dead, click the link below to try out Wondershare Recoverit for free. Seriously, in the description, there's a link for Moore's Law is Dead fans that will let you download a trial for free. And if you do this thing that costs you nothing, it helps out Moore's Law is Dead a ton. So please do check out Wondershare Recoverit V14 through the link below today. Technolads in Florida Man write in and say, hey, Tim and Tom, would you say NVIDIA effectively EOLing all Blackwell products above 8 gigabytes of VRAM, and perhaps even the 5060 soon if GDR7 prices keep getting more out of hand? Would you say that this is a bad sign for NVIDIA's next gen, where we won't see any VRAM increases at all, perhaps, except on the very high end with more price hikes than up the top of the lineup? Heck, might they effectively exit high-end GPU for a while? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think their next gen's supposed to launch like late next year. So I'm not sure. Well, if I'm not sure, that yeah, let me just let you talk. I mean, what do you think this says about NVIDIA's next generation?
Honestly, not that much.
Okay.
You know, I think obviously there's always panic in these sorts of things when it comes to like, this is going to have long-term implications and long-term effects, and it might. But the thing I always go back to is, you know, NVIDIA has to compete with themselves. So if they make, like, let's say, oh, you know, they have to go back and make tons of 8 gigabyte GPUs and they make them really expensive. It's like, yeah, okay, they can do that, but no one will buy it. Like no one is going to be like,
Like we're seeing with the 5060, right? The 5060 is, I've been told, really underperforming what they expected. Like because they just expect people to buy the 60 if it's $300, and people really aren't.
yeah. So I mean, if people already have a GPU today, and I know there's always people buying new systems and stuff like that, sure, but like a lot of people who have a gaming PC already and we're going to buy a whole new system or buy a DIY card to upgrade, if the new generation is just disgustingly expensive and completely inadequate for modern gaming, people aren't going to be rushing out to like purchase that card. So, I mean, they could very well make a ton of more 8 GB GPUs, but I think by the time those cards come out, people on 8 GB GPUs are not going to be like, wow, I'm going to rush out. I'm going to buy another 8 GB card. Like, what are the chances of that happening? The only reason that would happen is because you were absolutely forced into it because either you didn't have a PC or your component died or something like that. But you wouldn't see the huge demand that there would be for genuinely good products. And so there's always still an incentive to make products that people actually want to buy. And so I think that is most likely what we're going to see in the next generation is, NVIDIA still needs to incentivize people to purchase these cards, and they will make models that attempt to do that. But if anything, what's the most likely scenario? Like more of a crypto mining situation where you see the 30 series come out, great products, good supposed MSRPs, but they just don't sell it at that price or in those, in the amount that they were originally planning to until they can actually produce the cards for those prices. So if memory prices are still insane at the end of 2027, I think they'll probably still proceed with their plans, just that for a while they will be in very limited supply and very expensive, with the hope that maybe in the 6 month to 1 year time frame, especially if GPUs cycles are now over 2 years, they would just hope that, eventually, we might produce a few Founders Edition models and then eventually we'll try and make those cards come back down. But, NVIDIA is well aware that 8 GB of VRAM is not sufficient for modern GPUs. And the only reason they're prioritizing them now is because there's no supply of memory. It's not because they think 8 GB is a great choice and a great future.
It's perfect for 1080p gamers. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, of course, the other issue is, console gaming as well. Like, if PlayStations are still available with a suitable amount of memory and next-gen consoles are on the horizon, and then NVIDIA's producing, these garbage cards that no one wants within the next generation with just 8 GB, it's like people will just buy PlayStations or whatever. Or, if that's the best way to game, that's what people will buy. And again, NVIDIA knows that. So that's all going to be factored into their thinking.
Yeah. And it's funny on the PlayStation thing too. I keep getting questions like, RAM's hard to get. So will the PlayStation 6 only have this much RAM or get delayed? And I'm like, I think it's quite a bit too early to say what's happening this year is going to affect something that's coming out in almost really 2 years from now, at least. So, but what I would take away is something you said is based on some of the stuff you just said is, I think what we've learned from this gen for the future is NVIDIA certainly isn't afraid to keep lying. And like you said, that means they certainly are not afraid to launch something for a price they know it will not have. But the PS6 and to a degree, Xbox Magnus are going to be these things that have more RAM, push performance, the performance baseline higher. I think if NVIDIA is going to choose between, like you said, making some garbage card that looks terrible or making a great card that you can't actually buy at first, I think that's the strategy they choose. And I think they have to be aggressive, at least on paper, because they were with Ampere. I mean, they knew they had to launch some pretty strong graphics cards, even if it meant pushing power consumption really past where the Samsung Note could take, because the PS5 and Series X were launching. This was a gen where their cards had to be strong, right? I mean, and they're probably going to have to do that again next gen.
Yeah, I agree. And I think with NVIDIA, it's not like gaming is propping up the company anymore. So if they make models and, they're not overly attractive to begin with, but they're sort of, as we describe it, playing the game where they sort of say one thing and then another thing is the reality in the market. it's not like if the cards don't sell, then Nvidia as a company is dead. It's just like the gaming line on their, financial reports is not as attractive as it was. And they'll, they're constantly manipulating. I'm not mean manipulating as in being dodgy, but like they're
Mhm.
adjusting where they're supplying certain things across their entire product line based on where the demand is. So the focus right now is obviously the AI stuff, and that's what they're supplying the most. But if it turns out in end of 2027 that demand for AI isn't as strong as it was, and they need the gaming division to be more successful, then they'll make moves to ensure that that's the case. And of course, we have competition from other brands as well that may factor in depending on how successful they are. So, there's going to be many different things. But yeah, we're talking about a generation that's like far away. Like if we were saying, next gen NVIDIA is coming this year, then there might be some more discussions that are had around the configurations that they're choosing. They can change VRAM configurations quite easily, whereas the GPU dies are a bit more difficult. So, if that was a problem and they were thinking about launching in 6 months, then yeah, they might change some things. But I think we're still sounds like it's quite far off.
Yeah. Compressed AI blocks and Nicholas Terrar writes in and says 8 GB GPUs are starting to feel like a new quad core era. Will the lack of RAM limit the evolution of games? And I actually, before I go to you, I threw this question to a few developers before we started recording. And I'll put one quote on screen here for the person who said that they're fine being quoted. But they said to me that their answer at this point is just yes, and that at a certain point, even though some engines are well tuned to drop asset quality without hitching, others next generation are just going to stutter terribly. And so either way, it's not going to be ideal. And they wanted to insist with me that the best case scenario will be they start modifying engines to scale assets so they can play on 8 GB cards. But either way, something's going to give. Either way, like I know I've seen Steve at Hardware Unboxed talk about this. Like we're getting to a point with 8 GB GPUs where before, if you chose, like with some games, I guess I'd say between like low, medium, high textures, the base of the game, the important meat of it was fitting in like 2 GB, and then maybe low textures required 3, medium 4, whatever would go to 6 GB. Right now the meat of the game is like taking up like 6 GB, and so to go to low textures now, they're starting to have to go to like really, really low because all of the new advanced features they have are taking up that much space. And so what this dev said is like, either you're going to have ridiculously low asset quality, or there's just going to be an 8 GB GPU mode because we're like running out of space to even run the game in the first place. And I guess the one caveat I'll say is I just got a message from a dev that said we're going to have to start thinking about nerfing some of our features for 8 GB. And another dev said, he thinks the issue's overblown. So I guess, different studios say different things. But I wonder what you think, Tim, like what you're expecting. So I'm sure you talk to people like this all the time too. Like, are you concerned the prevalence of 8 GB cards is going to start limiting some of the choices devs make when next gen like consoles come out, and you would think they'd start pushing new features?
Well, so far, this has been an issue for a while now. We haven't really seen 8 GB limit a lot of games. This isn't something that's just cropped up overnight. 8 GB has sort of been the baseline spec for a while now, and game developers are still pushing more advanced features and things into games that require much more than 8 GB. So I think that will probably continue. I think the issue with game development, of course, is that it's a very long cycle. So whatever is happening right now isn't going to be necessarily seen in games for many years. So the games that we're getting in 2026, the min spec that they've been targeting has been set in stone like years ago.
21 or
And,
something, yeah.
like 8 GB was sort of, and when we're heading into this generation, 8 GB is definitely the lowest end spec, and most cards in the line now do have more than 8 GB. Obviously, there are problems at the low end, but two years ago, a couple of generations ago, 8 GB was much more widespread. So I think if you're thinking about developers, they have to come up with some sort of minimum spec that they're targeting. They would have been planning for a lot more than 8 GB today. So that's going to be a problem, of course, right now. And then if you think,
and that's what one person that just messaged me told me to. I just want to say, like, they said they did not expect Nvidia to keep having 8 GB in this much of the lineup for this long. And when they targeted something in the past, they thought 12 GB would be the minimum by now.
Yeah, of course. And then you're thinking about games that are sort of starting development now that are sort of maybe having these discussions based on what we're seeing with RAM prices, that prevalence of 8 GB and stuff. But then, the developers, they're still having to make these predictions for like 3 or 4 years from now, or even more, 5, 6 for like your big AAA games today. So if they're thinking, okay, well, RAM's hard to buy now, like they're sort of thinking, well, is that going to be true in 2030? And so, yeah, how many developers are going to be sitting here saying, well, 8 GB is still going to be an issue in 2030, or next generation consoles, which will almost certainly be out by then. If they're thinking, well, those are going to be the same or lower, like lower memory even than they currently are in 2030, I think a lot of developers are not going to be making that call. Like they're just going to be thinking this is more of a short-term thing. And that's because of the scale of games. Like if games were made on like a 1 or 2 year time frame, these things could, we'd probably see a lot more of this sort of like creating these 8 GB modes and sort of trying to optimize for these lower specs. But because it's such a long time frame, I think what you'll unfortunately see is that game developers will be making 8 GB modes, but they're not going to be these mythical optimized, this works really great on 8 GB configurations. What you'll see is the 8 GB cards will be running some garbage version of the game that runs at a low resolution, etc. Doesn't look great, but that's what they've had to do to sort of force the game to run on those sorts of systems. And you may even see performance problems and all sorts of things, and sort of they're sort of saying, well, this is a 1080p 30 FPS experience, or whatever the case is. I don't really see, especially when, again, the consoles, which are so dominant in terms of development and so much effort goes into them, this generation has more than 8 GB. The next generation almost certainly will as well. And again, we're talking about games that developers are going to have to start thinking about designing games for those next generation systems. With all the focus on that and making their nice shiny new features for those sort of products, they're not going to suddenly try and make everything work in 8 GB. It's just unfortunate that that's the way it is, because they just know that on consoles they can do more, and so they will. If PC gaming was more dominant, though, you might see a few changes there. But again, most games sell more on consoles still, so that's the focus, and they've got the memory to use.
Yeah, the only thing that I think might make dev second guess this, what you said, is that we did see last year quite a decline in console. Now, obviously, a lot of that was because of Xbox, but Switch 2 plus Switch 1 sold less last year than the previous year of just the Switch 1. It's a crazy statistic I saw. I mean, again, just to put that in perspective, everybody, that'd be like if the PS5 launched and sold worse than the PS4 the previous year. I mean, that'd be crazy. I mean, I should say the PS5 plus PS4 sold less than if only the PS4 existed in like 2019. Like that's, and the PS5 had sales go down too. So I do wonder if there's a little bit here though, where devs will have to go, well, we need to worry about these 8 GB cards because this is becoming more dominant. PC gaming, I believe, actually grew last year. But I go on.
I guess so, but like the PS5 is still sort of a baseline. Even if sales fall off, it's not like game developers are going to be like, well, let's go back and start making PS4 games, in which case then we need to start optimizing for 8 GB. They still know that the majority of consoles that they're going to be targeting, which is probably at this point PS5 and then maybe Switch 2, which does have more than 8 GB as well. If they're targeting that and people just don't buy new consoles, or maybe even if the PS6 comes out and that's not that attractive, it's too expensive or something, people will continue to use their current console, which is most likely to be a PS5 or some type similar to that. And so, yeah, to go back to this situation where 8 GB is sort of the dominant baseline for PC, for like gaming in general, we're sort of almost like it's going backwards, like we're past that point. And so to go backwards across all of gaming, I think I just don't really see that happening, which unfortunately would just mean, as I sort of said, that the people that do have 8 GB will get these nerfed, low quality, low tier experiences. And if that's all people can buy for PC gaming, then it's not going to be an overly attractive platform, but hopefully people have sort of gotten their cards in before that point. And so can sort of still enjoy reasonable experiences or just play older games that, work just fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would agree with your overall point though, which is that they're going to be, especially if it's a developer making a truly new, groundbreaking AAA experience where they really want to push boundaries, they're going to look at what we have now and go, we just have to assume, that 12 gigabytes will be the minimum, at least, maybe even, honestly, if you ask me, the 6060 should have 16 gigabytes in a year and a half. Like, and if it doesn't, though, what I do suspect, based on what I've heard recently, though, is, like you said, it's kind of like, what's a good example? Kind of like, they ported Hogwarts Legacy to the Switch One after it was already out on the other ones. And my suspicion would be, like you said, they'll have to do something because they feel like, because they don't know, like, what if it turns out that they really need this mode for a third of their players? But I think they're going to build the game first, and then they will go, what knob can we turn down? Can we turn player counts down? Or
Yeah.
like, should I say themes you see on screen? Should we just, maybe we'll have a mode where it requires 720p and every soldier looks like a moving rectangle. But there's we'll just have garbage mode, and that's what we'll do. I do think that they thought they wouldn't have had to have worried about that at all, though, a few years ago. And now I think they think they'll at least need the garbage mode toggle, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think the baseline of the development will still be for sort of the high spec sort of stuff, but then they'll have some sort of, as you put it, garbage mode, turn down everything sort of thing, below low sort of settings for people. So, will it limit the evolution of games from that sense? I mean, yeah, I think game developers will probably think twice about including things that can't be disabled at all. Like if there's some sort of memory hogging feature that is essential for the game and that pushes the game to the point where it's just not possible to run on 8 gigabytes at all. You probably won't see those sort of features be implemented maybe. But if we're talking about the ultra sort of settings things, I don't think we'll see ultra settings be optimized for 8 gigabytes anytime soon. Like ultra will remain the sort of 12, 16 plus sort of gigabyte scenario.
All right. Switching gears here. Large Cheese Grater writes in and says, what are your thoughts about DLSS 4.5 versus FSR 4? And also, what are your thoughts about NVIDIA's ability to create unique software features or even things like G-Sync Pulsar? Furthermore, do you think AMD will ever catch up to NVIDIA with regards to software and hardware innovation by making their own unique features? Or will they always be a step behind and busy copying NVIDIA's latest initiatives?
All right, fair few questions there. On DLSS 4.5 versus FSR 4, I haven't actually looked into that just yet. I am working on a DLSS 4.5 sort of video at the moment, but largely that's been just 4 versus 4.5 at this stage. So can't really comment too much on how those features look. But obviously, DLSS 4 was already superior to FSR 4 visually, and DLSS 4.5 does look better again. So I mean, you can sort of extrapolate what you'd expect from that. NVIDIA's ability to create unique features is something I think is key to their current position of having significant market share, 70, 80% of the market plus. This is the thing that NVIDIA prides themselves on, really, is sort of being at the forefront of, having the highest performance GPU at all times, and then also providing the best software stack. So that includes, G-Sync Pulsar, but many other things, DLSS, frame generation. You can obviously argue about how useful some of these features are and whether you personally would use them, but they still are innovating on these things first most of the time. And so, will AMD ever catch up? I mean, honestly, no, is probably the first thing that I would think of. I can't really make any case for why they would be able to. A question for you, Tom, maybe is, when was the last time that Radeon and GeForce had software feature parity? Like, what year would you have to go back to before that was the case?
See, this is funny because I think I had a submission the last time you were on that was a similar question to this, just about the previous, DLSS 3.5 or whatever. And I believe you also asked me a similar thing. And my answer is basically, well, I mean, look, if you go back to, and it is quite a while ago, like a decade ago, you can go, yeah, I mean, look, AMD had better triple screen support. I guess NVIDIA was playing with 3D, if anyone remembers those monitors. And then AMD had TressFX, and that looked significantly better than NVIDIA Hairworks. I think it was certainly up for debate then, right? And that comes from an opinion that I think PhysX was pretty much a joke by 2015, So I think that is about when. But I also think it's sad because AMD did do things. I mean, you had, what was it? Mantle, that's what it was called with Battlefield 4. You had Mantle that led to Vulcan. You did see AMD Radeon Chill. You did see AMD trying these new features before Nvidia would do them. And sometimes Nvidia would make Hairworks after Tress Effects, basically. But it was about a decade ago. And I find it sad that AMD can't come up with really anything. Like, I don't see why they couldn't have some small team thinking of, like, what's this new thing we could do to optimize shader cache loading? Well, we still innovate on FSR, but they keep acting like they don't have the resources to walk and chew gum at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it seems like AMD's primary focus is just copying NVIDIA. And even when you go back to some of the things that you were talking about, like, Tress Effects and that sort of thing, I'm pretty sure NVIDIA Hairworks came first and that Tress Effects is a more efficient, better version of that. Maybe NVIDIA would argue with that, but I think Tress Effects is sort of did run better for largely the same effect. But
I think it looked a lot better too. Yeah. And yes, maybe Hairworks came a little bit before. Yeah, it seemed like it wasn't in a lot of games until after Tomb Raider, but maybe that's just my perception.
Yeah, but it's a marketing thing as well, right? Like NVIDIA's sort of going, well, we've got GameWorks, which had Hairworks and then other features that people could implement. There was some water stuff and smoke effects and all that sort of thing. And, AMD then comes along with their solution. You look back for things like G-Sync versus FreeSync. G-Sync came first, and while AMD would argue, hey, but this feature was part of Vaser beforehand. It's like, well, yeah,
no, but you were using it,
or whatever. But like Nvidia decided to make that a gaming feature, and AMD didn't. So you made the feature second, and you can argue FreeSync was the better, more open solution or whatever. But Nvidia still does.
They copied them though.
They did copy them, right? They did it. NVIDIA did it first, and then AMD made their version of it. And some of the time it's a more successful copy, and some of the time, like we see with FSR, especially older versions of FSR, it's not as good. And so if you've got a company that's constantly making the features first and being, doing things for gamers, and you can argue about ray tracing and all that sort of thing, they always appear to be innovating on the forefront of gaming technology. And then you've got the other company, AMD, who is sort of looking at what NVIDIA is doing and then copying what they're doing for, let's say, maybe 70% of what NVIDIA does. I mean, there's still features NVIDIA has that AMD doesn't have to certain degrees. And so, yeah, that's a big problem. And I think, the last time, I personally can't think of a time where AMD was definitely innovating more than NVIDIA. Like they were constantly the company that was first to features or was sort of seen as being on the forefront. There's no time in history where Radeon has sort of, maybe pre my era, so you have to go back to like ATI days. I'm not sure what it was like back then.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe then, but I would agree that, like, I thought they had better features in like 2012 that I thought were more useful. I wouldn't say that they were like 2-to-1 more features. Like, it's like they had a quantity advantage or something, and it was certainly up for debate.
Yeah, I mean, back then, AMD was a bit more competitive on performance as well. So the whole, there was a high-end GPU debate, and market share sort of reflected that back 10, 15 years ago. Market share between NVIDIA and AMD was much more even than it is now. So yeah, I mean, can they catch up? Of course they can catch up. They can invest and try and innovate on these sorts of things and come up with solutions. And I've been asked by, I think, you in the past and other people, okay, so what should AMD do then? Like, what is the feature they should focus on? It's like, well, it's I don't know. It's like I can't really give a suggestion to AMD, because if I could, that would be sort of, I don't know, like a consulting job or something, like telling people, here's my multi-million-dollar idea for you to make tons of money off Radeon cards. It's not really my job, right? But there's obviously people at NVIDIA that come up with very interesting things like G-Sync Pulsar that we just saw, which is genuinely a very interesting and capable technology, and various other things over the years. There's definitely areas to gaming right now that people are frustrated with. You mentioned things like shader caching, the stuttering problem in games. I think Intel has recently been talking a lot about how they're trying to combat that. There are things that people don't like about gaming today, but they can't just be like, well, we've got the cards that are slightly cheaper. They offer you maybe more VRAM depending on the segment, and then we're just going to have copies of NVIDIA's features that are maybe as good in some scenarios, maybe not as good, and then some features we just won't offer equivalents to. And again, like people are going to bring up things like, sometimes the control panel that AMD's offered has been better than Nvidia's. It's like, yeah, there's been advantages for a few years here and there for certain things, but I think if you took everything as a whole, yes, Radeon has been behind and or copying Nvidia. So I don't see, I mean, obviously with the RDNA 3 era, they really didn't have the sales to sort of back up the investment. I think now with RDNA 4, especially because the architecture itself does support more modern instructions and those sorts of things, they do have more capabilities, more ability to innovate than they had. The architecture does need to be there, the performance needs to be there. But whether or not in this AI era, you're suddenly going to start seeing AMD invest tons of money into gaming software features. It seems like, the FSR team is stretched pretty thin. Like they move from working on thing to thing to thing. They move, they make FSR 4, then they, start polishing and finishing Redstone, and then, whatever they're up to now, I'm not sure, but seems to be a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the next generation will be one to watch pretty closely. I actually thought that the performance of FSR 4 was surprisingly good for how good it was, going from what felt like they were just languishing with RDNA 3 as FSR support. I mean, they announced 3.1, all this stuff. It takes way too long to come out. So I was pleasantly surprised by 4. So hopefully that's a good sign of like some sort of trajectory. But at the end of the day, RDNA 3 is like kind of in the PS5 Pro, and then I guess it will technically be in the Steam machine, but I think that's a different circumstance. For the most part, you're not really seeing it in anything that big compared to like RDNA 2. And I think with RDNA 5, that will be one to watch, because unlike 4 and 3, this is something that's going to go in all of these Zen 6 APUs, Xbox Magnus, PlayStation 6, PlayStation 6 handheld. And if there was ever a time to like get it down in a way that we saw them kind of do, compete well with Ampere, it would be the next generation. But if we see RDNA 5 come out though, and like, I don't know what it will be called, PSSR 3 or whatever is on PS6, looks significantly better than 4 or FSR 4.5. There's no announcement for FSR 5. That would unfortunately be where I go, yeah, I don't know if AMD is ever going to catch up, because next gen from an IP perspective is really important for Radeon, because it's going to go into so many different products. So I think that will be one to watch to see if they're finally putting I shouldn't say taking it seriously, I'll be more like literal, putting the resources forward they should probably put forward to support a big product.
Well, I think it's also a marketing thing as well. Like, Nvidia, a lot of their features have been proprietary, and they sort of have become the cornerstone of their marketing initiative across all of GeForce cards. Whereas AMD, a lot of the things that even when they've copied them, they've sort of made them open features. And people are going to get very upset because people are like, well, open's obviously better. Don't go away from open and making those sorts of things. But if you make a feature and it's one brand is making it only for their cards, and the other brand is making it for their cards and their competitors, it's much harder to market those specific features as a reason to buy a Radeon GPU. Because, yeah, Hairworks runs really well on GeForce, but TressFX runs really well on GeForce and Radeon. So there's no reason to buy a Radeon card to get access to that feature. You may as well just keep buying a GeForce card so you can use Hairworks and use TressFX. And that's been the problem across many features over the years. If I think FSR 4 is sort of maybe a step towards admitting that open scenario that they had didn't work and doesn't work in the modern landscape. And it's been interesting as well if you look at consoles, right, where you've got PlayStation still largely making exclusives, and in Nintendo making exclusives, and how important exclusive software is, whether that's games or features or whatever, how important that is to sell the hardware relative to Xbox doing a much more open platform, and suddenly Xbox is dead. So, I would love to be in a world where everything is open and accessible and everyone can use all features. There's no exclusives or anything like that. But clearly that is less successful from a company standpoint than making proprietary features. I think people like with FSR 4, is anyone who like there's obviously complaints that FSR4 is not on older Radeon cards, but are GeForce owners upset that FSR4 isn't available for them? No, they don't care because they just use DLSS. The thing was that if you buy a Radeon card, you want the absolute best features for Radeon GPU owners. And so if they make good quality features and they're exclusive to those models, that's fine, so long as they're actually good. So that when you buy the card, you're not like, oh, I was sold FSR4 as being this amazing exclusive feature and then I used it and it sucked. Like, you don't want to have that situation. But as long as you're executing and you can sort of justify it, I think that's unfortunately in some ways the way the modern GPU gaming landscape is. Exclusives still matter.
Tired of getting hit in the face by unfair prices from Microsoft software? Well, you don't need to deal with that anymore. Start off 2026 right by going to cdkeyoffer.com. That's right, this piece of content is once again sponsored by a sponsor that has been a supporter of Moore's Law is Dead for almost the entire channel's life, cdkeyoffer.com. And I've been partnering with them for this long because they just give gamers something that I think they need to have. Fair pricing on Microsoft Windows and Office products. And in fact, if you go down to the description, you can click on the links there to support the channel by checking out their products, but then also support the channel further if you use offer code BROKENSILICON to save yourself an additional 25% on all Microsoft software. And there's also Die Shrink to save 3% off everything else on the website. Once again, I'm very happy to be working with cdkeyoffer.com another year of this channel's life, and I hope you'll show support to a company that supports this channel, cdkeyoffer.com. Prof Next Gen writes in and says, with DLSS 4.5 performing slower on older RTX cards, do you think that now gives AMD the permission to release a slower performing FSR4 on earlier RDNA cards? I think that's a very funny question. For those who don't know, AMD said, and it's weird because they basically publicly said they're working on, I think they did publicly say they're working on FSR4 for RDNA 3. And then now it almost sounds like they're walking that back. And at least for what I've heard, they paused that development. And then they said, well, if it doesn't work as well on older generations, we can't ship that. And Nvidia just did. So I wonder what you think about that.
Yeah. Do they need permission from Nvidia to do stuff? They act
like it sometimes.
Like, what are we going on? Like, they don't need permission to offer a feature to people. Like, yeah, it runs slow. Okay, yeah, sure. FSR4 Int 8 may not work as well on RDNA 3 as the FP8 version on RDNA 4. Okay. Yeah, but FSR 3 sucks. So what are we even talking about here? We need permission for them to release a slower but clearly way better version of FSR4 for older RDNA GPU owners. This feature should be released right now. People should already be able to use this feature. So it's absolutely crazy they haven't done this. Obviously, the only reason I can think of is that they're trying to encourage people to upgrade to RDNA 4 on purpose. People that own RDNA 2, 3, or whatever. The cat's out of the bag, guys. Everyone knows you can do it. I have shown that it's possible. Other people have shown that this is possible. You can download the tools to do this right now unofficially. So you can't just, I guess, mislead people by saying, well, it's too slow and bad on RDNA 3. We need permission from Nvidia to make a worse version or something. It's like, come on now. Just release it. You're kidding yourselves. And it's good for the community feedback and stuff and the whole supporting gamers thing. The fact it's not released is, a bit of a blunder, I would say.
I agree that it's not just bad if AMD, well, if they are, is considering never officially bringing FSR4 to RDNA 3. It's bad that it hasn't already happened. I mean, they're announcing at CES, Gorgon Point, new Strix Halo products that use RDNA 3.5. And I believe some of even their Zen 6 APUs on the budget side are going to still use RDNA 3.5. You cannot keep shipping these products in lack of feature. That would be like the number one feature you would have with a weak integrated graphics to make it run modern games well. It's absolute insanity to me. I mean, it's going to become a major issue too this year. When Panther Lake comes out, if XE Super Sampling 3 is actually decent, why wouldn't it be? The other one was all right. and they're like, yeah, still use FSR 3.1 on Strix Halo against Panther. Like it's absolutely ridiculous. And I don't really know what they're thinking, except I guess my hunch would be they think they don't have the resources, or they don't think it's worth the resources to keep supporting two paths of FSR 4. But it doesn't seem like it would be that hard. And the fact of the matter is, they've already announced this is coming to PS5 Pro, which uses at least some upgraded version of RDNA 3.5. So I just think it's absolutely outrageous that this would come to a PlayStation probably before it comes to RDNA 3.
Well, yeah, I mean, it doesn't, from no angle that I can see apart from encouraging gamers to upgrade, does it make any sense? Especially as we're in an era now where it's harder to upgrade, things are more expensive. It's just such an obvious, easy win. And the whole like, okay, supporting multiple different FSR paths, like, yeah, sure, okay. Maybe I could buy that if FSR 4 has had tons of updates since it was released, like they're constantly upgrading the model or something, and it would be really difficult.
If 4.6 was already out and we were comparing it to the new DLSS.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. As far as I know, the FSR 4 model is largely the same as it was a year ago. So that's not a very good excuse at all. And the main thing for me is like, they could probably get away with saying all this stuff if it was just a theory that it was possible. Like if no one had proven it, it was just sort of like, yeah, maybe they were able to make a version of FSR 4. But the fact that we can use this feature right now, like there's no hiding it away. You can't just delete the source code off your repository and go like, oops, guys, sorry. It's actually not possible for us to do that when everyone knows it's possible. It's like, you know, there was all these theories and stuff back in the early days of DLSS where people were like, well, I'm sure NVIDIA could make a version of DLSS for cards that don't have tensor cores. Maybe they were able to do that. Maybe there's some theoretical version they're able to make. It was never a thing where you could just download a DLL file and start using DLSS on your RTX, on your GTX GPUs. If that was the case, there would have been a massive outrage and people would be like, I can't believe NVIDIA's not releasing this feature because it's proven to work. And we're actually in that scenario right now with RDNA 3 and RDNA 4 where we know it is possible. And so it absolutely should be released. And I don't know whether they're thinking of it as a beta version or something. Like when I used it, it doesn't really seem like it is beta quality, like inferior, bad quality. Like in the games that I tried it in, it is clearly better than FSR 3. And even if there's like maybe some artifact issues in some scenarios or edge cases where it doesn't work that well, fine. But FSR 3 universally doesn't work that well. So it's got to be better than that. Anyway.
Yeah. I wonder if you land on this, because I recently had Ancient Gameplays on, and you know he's tested it FSR 4 extensively on previous generations, and he thinks at a minimum, or actually I think his opinion, and I hope I'm not misrepresenting it, was that it would be enough to have an experimental mode, like a toggle in the Radeon drivers. You click that and it forces FSR 4 in all games that have FSR 3.1, and that's good enough. But it is my opinion that like that's better than nothing. But I think actually we should be demanding an official support of it for 3. That this makes them look like a Wish.com brand to not support cards they're still selling. It's not even previous gens, it's cards and APUs they're still selling. Would you agree with that experimental toggle is not enough?
Yeah, I mean, the experimental toggle is a nice sort of thing if you want to put in the absolute minimum effort. But realistically, like they should just be supporting their older GPU models in the best way that they can. And again, like an experimental toggle would maybe be justified if, you know, people had tested the current source code version, compiled, etc., and realized that there are like quite a lot of problems with it. Like in some games, it doesn't work properly or something along those lines. But again, I think extensive testing has sort of shown that that's not really the case. It appears to be quite close to final, if not appropriate for a final release. And maybe AMD knows more, that they've found some problems with it or something along the lines. Maybe on certain models of GPU it doesn't work ideally or something. I just feel like, you know, especially even with DLSS 4 to some extent, but now more with DLSS 4.5, you know, people are sort of just accepting that, yeah, okay, I've got an old RTX 20 series GPU. I can't expect DLSS 4.5 to run amazingly well on my 7-year-old GPU. And so they're kind of like, yeah, okay, it is what it is. Like no one's expecting RDNA 3 version to be absolutely identical and as good as the version for RDNA 4. You've got an older GPU. It wasn't advertised to support this feature. It's got a different architecture with inferior support for certain things. Of course, it's not going to run as well, but I think the gamers are sort of, they expect that. Older cards don't run games as well. This is just it's just a thing, right? Like, if you want the latest and greatest stuff, you have to have the latest and greatest cards. And the older back that you go, things don't quite run as well. But so long as they're providing the best possible experience for those people, that's fine. So it's crazy to me that this is just not a feature.
Do you think AMD under, I guess the answer is probably obviously no, but what do you think AMD thinks about, do you think they might realize they've miscalculated on this? Because I have been getting a few comments every video I put out about if FSR4 might come to RDNA 3 for like 6 months, every video. There's always some comment. So I actually think this is a pretty big deal to a lot of people. I mean, I'd say my brother has an RDNA 3 graphics card, and if he learns that FSR4 is never coming to it, I can tell you he's going to think twice about getting another AMD graphics card if he thinks they will not get as much as, to a reasonable level, so the newest features for at least the next 5 years after it comes out.
I think they might be forced into doing it. I think it's pretty clear they don't really want to do this. But I think this comes back to the issues that Radeon has as a division, maybe AMD as a company. You know, it's like reading the room sort of vibes. Like lately, what do? They announced some sort of AI bundle with the Radeon driver. It's like, are these guys aware of the gaming community? Like, it feels like sometimes they sort of are. Like, you know, they've made fun of the VRAM scenario at various different times when their products are favorable to advertise that. And then they sort of, you know, quiet down when they still release 8GB GPUs. So
or 4GB.
Yeah, so they're sort of aware. And then they come out and they're like, yeah, so what do gamers want? AI bundles. What do they not want? You know, features to be supported. And they do things like, you know, putting the old GPU drivers into a maintenance branch, and they stumble over how they're sort of messaging that to people and backtracking and doing all sorts of stuff. It's like, this is just another one of those things where it's like the obvious answer is release this. And then they just somehow trip over themselves, stumble around. They don't take the easy marketing wins. This is such an easy marketing win that it's right there. They don't take it. It just makes no sense. So, yeah, will they release it? I mean, I don't know. Like, as a company, I would say probably not. Like, you sort of look at how they've handled other things, and yeah, probably not.
So you lean towards them just kind of ignoring the noise and assuming it's not that big of a deal. I mean, I know their big priority now is open sourcing Redstone. And so I have to assume there's some degree there where they're hoping that leads to these third-party tools. But again, I don't think that, again, I think it makes them look like a wish.com brand. And I think there's games, I believe, where you'll like trigger anti-cheat if you used a tool like that sometimes. So like, it's just not a good solution.
Yeah, I mean, again, like, I don't know whether they will release this feature or not, but
sure,
everything, like, I haven't heard from AMD like, yeah, this is like coming, we're just not ready to do it. Every time it's just like, we have nothing to update you on in regards to this. You know, it's been available for people to use for so long now that, you know, if it was going to come, surely it would have come by now. Like, Redstone came and went. You know, that was another opportunity to sort of update the features for everyone. And
I thought they would.
That came and went. It wasn't released. So if they're not going to do it, then we already know it's a thing. I think they're just sort of pushing ahead with this sort of, you know, those architectures are outdated. And I know that they are still used for modern current products. So it's not really a great excuse or anything, but I think they're just sort of pushing ahead with RDNA 4 is a massive architectural overhaul. And if you want the newest features, you must have an RDNA 4 architecture product.
All right. Switching gears again. Compressed AI Blocks writes in, it says, Panther Lake seems pretty great. Do you guys think it shifts any meaningful mindshare for Intel, or is it arriving at an inconvenient time due to DRAM shortages? I think they've got something quite good on their hands, with the downside possibly just being how expensive the nodes they're using are, but DRAM could severely impact their ability to shift mindshare in the market right now.
So I'm not overly familiar with Panther Lake, so you'll have to correct me, but my understanding is right that this is largely a mobile part and that it is not a
Yeah.
desktop.
Yeah, there were it's like Meteor Lake in that there were some plans for desktop, but they canceled those a long time ago. I would say though, unlike Meteor Lake, this seems quite good. Like it has like not Meteor Lake had an IPC regression. This has a slight increase. Its power consumption, from what I'm hearing from people testing it, actually does sound pretty insane, which I suppose you'd expect with something that uses what 18A angstrom nodes and a combination of that and 3 nanometer nodes and stuff. Um, and yeah, I mean, like it looks pretty much on the CPU front like it's bringing Arrow Lake's performance or better to like Lunar Lake power consumption profiles, while at the same time having integrated graphics that seem to hit between like a 3050 and 4050, closer to a 4050. So that's, I think that's pretty good. You know, I think it, and especially on the integrated graphics side, that is higher than I heard it would be. That sounds really good to me in some ways, especially compared to how lackluster I feel a lot of their recent releases were, even in just laptop.
Yeah, I mean, I think with Intel on the laptop side of things, I wouldn't necessarily describe them as having a mind share or market share issue. Intel laptops are still very, very popular, and that's effectively propping up a large portion of Intel as a company is their continued success in mobile. So, does it improve their mind share? I think that the issues with mind share for Intel is more like gaming desktops and sort of the ultimate high performance side of things. Maybe with graphics as well. I mean, obviously, I think the latest Battlemage stuff has been more successful than previous versions, but there's still obviously a newcomer for GPUs in general. So I think, the mindshare stuff and where people sort of make fun of Intel and sort of going, oh, I won't buy Intel, is the desktop CPUs, the gaming platforms and those sorts of things. For laptops, I mean, yeah, they hadn't previously had a product that's on the sort of level of a Strix Halo sort of thing or have these sort of high performance GPUs, but has that affected their mindshare and market share all that much? I'm not really sure it has to any significant degree, especially because, AMD hurting their mindshare by labeling every single product they make as AI, maybe. So, yeah, I think obviously making the part a lot better, a lot higher performance is going to benefit them and sort of, I guess, bring back this sort of view that Intel are able to innovate and improve and do things on their own process nodes that are actually moving things forward. But then, yeah, the laptop side of things has always been, well, at least for the last few generations, has been where most of the innovation has been anyway. So all the good stuff that they've been doing has been there. So, yeah, I'm not sure how that affects the market in general.
Yeah, it's interesting too because again, we'll have to wait for reviews, which I believe come out in like a week and a half. So, we can't be sure how good it is. And I wouldn't be surprised if there was some fluff in there and how they portrayed, for example, like their multi-threading performance. It wouldn't surprise me if actually they're not ahead of AMD there. And you'll always need to wait, especially with Intel, to see what the driver stability is like on the graphics when it comes out. I'm hoping that's good. But what I find interesting is, at least to me, my official thoughts right now are, I think Panther Lake looks great. What's it, with regards to what you're saying about it not affecting mindshare, OEMs up until now still have been telling me they don't really care. Like they don't see Panther Lake as something that changes anything. And from what I can tell, most of it's been because they were pretty mad at how Meteor Lake and Arrow Lake turned out. And so they didn't really take Intel seriously. But they seem pleasantly surprised now. But from what I hear, they've bought up a ton of Lunar Lake supply late last year because they saw the RAM shortages coming, and Lunar Lake was still priced like, because it comes pre-bundled with the RAM built onto it. It was priced like 2024 prices. And so my greatest concern with Panther Lake is that on paper, it's just fantastic. Even in practice, if you can get your hands on it, but that it's launching into a market where OEMs still have a bunch of last gen stuff to get rid of, and if you want Panther like the RAM's not there for it. That'd be my biggest concern. And then also like what you said, where the things that tend to move mindshare, they're not really doing anything that crazy in desktop for, well, at least until Nova Lake.
Yeah, I mean the RAM's point is sort of interesting. I guess the competition, like in a way, right, that oversupply of last generation product is good for competition, because it means that they can't just make Like they can't just make Panther Lake products and price them at absurd levels and just be like, well, that's the only option, guys. Sorry, we ran out of the old models. Too bad. If there's still this oversupply of the old models, that will hopefully keep prices a little bit in check. Now, obviously, they've got limits on what they can do for the DRAM side of things, but yeah, I mean, there's always going to be that price to performance level where, you know, if they're trying to sell Panther Lake for a certain price and then the Lunar Lake parts are not as good in a variety of ways, but because they've got so many of them and the DRAM was cheaper and stuff like that, it's actually a better product overall. Again, I wouldn't be like overly upset about that sort of thing. Like the high performance stuff's always nice. Like you can sort of see, okay, this has got a powerful integrated GPU and stuff like that, but it's all about the value proposition. There's no point making those parts if they're absurdly expensive. So yeah, that's sort of how I see it. But again, like I'm not overly familiar with the mobile stuff anymore. Obviously, we used to test a fair bit of that at Hardware Unboxed, but yeah, these days I keep tabs on it, sort of look at it occasionally. I saw some of the very impressive graphics results where they were sort of, you know, comparing it, testing it to other high performance parts, but I haven't looked into it in depth.
Yeah. All right. I've got a couple other Intel related questions here that I'm just going to kind of summarize without reading them as. Do you have any expectations for the B770 that is allegedly still coming out? Which, and I say allegedly because I've heard it is. I just can't believe it's not out yet. I mean, honestly. And do you think there's any world here where like Intel's back on the right track? I mean, whether not just for graphics, but for the company as a whole.
Yeah, so the B770, I mean, last year we were pretty sure that this product would not be released.
Yeah, Steve said he thinks it never will be.
Yeah, I mean, I have a very similar opinion. I think that if we were talking about the GPU market of last year, there's just no way they were releasing that product. I don't think it would have been economically viable. And we've discussed that a fair bit in our content if you want to go back and have a look at what we said in relation to that. But we're in a very different market now. And so a product can be more successful if your competitors' products don't exist. So, you know, if the B770 maybe wasn't economically viable because you could readily buy 5060 Ti 16 gigs for $400 or whatever, and you had a 9060 XT 16 gig around that sort of $350 to $400 price, and yeah, of course, like they might have to release it and it sucks and there's no point releasing it. But if you can't buy those cards, and then there might be some reason to release it. So there's a potential for that. But then again, like the margins on Intel GPUs are so low that they don't have a lot of room to move if the memory significantly increases the BOM price of the card. Like they can't subsidize a B770 and make it like, oh, you know, we've got a 16 gig model, but it's super cheap because we're subsidizing it or whatever. It's like, no, it's going to be priced based on how much the memory is costing them to source. So that could be a serious problem for them. So yeah, on that side of things, you know, I think Intel's GPUs have been certainly much better this generation. Obviously, they're not competitive in terms of performance with mid-tier and higher-tier products, but the B580 is still a competitive product. Like it's unlike with the Alchemist stuff where you're sort of like, yeah, no one's really going to be buying it at that price. Once the B580 started to actually be available for $250 US, even with the more recent releases of GPUs, they can make sense to buy. Like if you want 12 gigabytes, you feel like you're going to be limited in that sense and you're playing at sort of 1440p. Yeah, the B580 is a card that does make sense. So can they repeat that with high tier models in this current market? I wouldn't have said so last year, but now maybe they can. I think though, to be clear, I think they have made the GPU. So I don't think they're like having to spin up a whole new GPU.
Oh yeah, it's been around for a while, I think.
Yeah, I think they've, whether or not they've mass produced it, or I'm not sure, but they were planning to make it, just that at some point they realized, maybe it's not going to be as competitive as it was. And this is all my speculation. Like I don't actually know for sure, but my speculation is that they previously thought they were going to release it. And then at some point they went, in the current market, maybe it's not possible. But then if they've mass produced a whole bunch of GPU dies and they have need to use them for something, maybe they would have just released it anyway. But that's the only thing I could have thought of is, yeah, that maybe they would have previously just made a limited edition run or something. But you never know. Things are quite volatile at the moment, so you never really know.
Yeah, I would What I heard is that it was like the G31 die, the high end die, was actually in development first, and then the B580 die was, and that they kept running into bug after bug after bug. It was almost described to me that it was like Maxwell 1.0 versus 2.0, like not that any of the Maxwell cards had bugs, but like that the 750 Ti was technically Maxwell 1.0, and then next gen is when you got the others. And that's why the B580 is actually kind of okay. And that's why Lunar Lake is actually pretty good, is that those were like the fixed version of Battlemage, that they've kind of been struggling making the big die run without bugs for a very, very long time. And then, like you brought up, like, and then they ran into, are we really going to launch this for $500 when they can get a 9060 XT for 350? Maybe that will change, though. I think what it really comes down to is, have they actually been able to fix those bugs, which I have no clue, but also fix the CPU overhead thing, because that was a big core pillar of Steve's argument. Was he thinks already the B580 is kind of dubious in a lot of builds because you need a really fast CPU for it to perform how they portray it in benchmarks, official slides. And if that issue's still there, I mean, then that means this thing kind of doesn't work unless, like you said, they don't have competition. So I guess where my head's at is, I don't know. Did they fix it? One, two, did they actually make the driver scale? I mean, you'd hope so. They kind of need to figure that out at some point here. I mean, even just for integrated graphics to continue getting faster. And then point number three would just be, were they planning to release this late last year? Because I heard they were. If they were, that means they probably already bought up the RAM this would use. And so maybe they just have that there at a reasonable price and they can sell some limited number. Or is it that they never were really sure if they were going to launch it? And if they want to launch it now, they have to spin up production and buy this RAM at like whatever it is, $20 a gigabyte. Because if it's that world, I mean, I think even if there weren't competition, and maybe you can tell me if you disagree, but I think there's just a price people aren't going to pay more than for like in Intel graphics card. I'd even say that's probably true of AMD. Like if AMD made a card right now that was 50% faster than the 5090 and they sold it for $5,000, I still don't really think that would sell in high numbers because no one's buying a $5,000 Radeon card. They're just not going to. And I think that there might be a price point where Intel is like $500. So even if there's no competition and it's $600, I still don't really see that working.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's an early adopter sort of thing. I know they're on the second generation now, but it's, yeah, buying an Intel GPU is very much, you're sort of expecting that there's going to be some games where the architecture just doesn't work very well and there's scaling issues, obviously the overhead thing as well. The driver support for various different features and things isn't going to be on the level of Nvidia in many areas. So yeah, that all that stuff is fine if you're selling a $250 GPU. Like people are sort of expecting, yeah, for $250, like I'm not going to get a top tier sort of experience, but the higher up in the price tiers you go, the less justifiable those flaws are. And so if they're making a $500 GPU, I mean, yeah, like normally you'd sort of say, well, that's 5070 sort of tier, 4060 Ti 16 gig, that sort of level, 9070s as well, roughly around that sort of price. And even if they're $50 more, I think a lot of people would just go, yeah, if it's $500 for the Intel card, but I could buy a 5070 for $550, they'd just buy the 5070. It doesn't really matter too much what the performance of the B770 is in that scenario. Like they'd just be like, I'll just buy a 5070. And so, yeah, that makes it a bit difficult for Intel to get up to that level, but it's a slow progress sort of thing. Like eventually they will be able to justify higher price tags. And the same with AMD, like the newer feature set that they're able to offer means that they can start selling cards at a higher price point and not have them just bomb and not be capable of selling. So yeah, I mean, what's the price limit for Intel? I'm not sure. I think you would get some interest for a $500 GPU, but it would really have to be like, it can't just be the same price to performance as existing models. Like no one's, even in this current climate, no one's really going to be rushing out to buy a B770 that's just as good as other $500 cards in performance, but has all those weaknesses. For $500, you'd really be wanting to get like pretty high tier performance. And so again, that throws into question the sort of economics, as we've sort of said previously.
Yeah, my suggestion would be, if they have some quantity, 500,000, 1,000,000 lying around they have to eventually sell. Do a limited edition run of a professional card, because at least from what I hear, people do really like their professional cards though. Like if you look at Newegg's top sellers, often Intel's there simply because of just how much ridiculously cheaper they are than the competition. And with that scenario, you don't need to worry about like if Starfield can't boot up, because all they need the ARC card to do is run this one professional app well, and if it does, they don't care. So I guess I'll say I would be surprised if they didn't at least do a limited edition run of some professional model. But again, I'm really surprised nothing's come out yet. I feel like I see people claim it's going to come out in a month, every month. So I really have no clue.
Yeah, the Pro model will be interesting as well, because you could just test that for gaming, see how it goes, and then Intel might have a few more data points to go off. So could be a successful strategy. But yeah, I mean, if they've made a whole bunch of GPU dies, they probably will want to get rid of them at some point. I guess the question is just to what level have they done that? We have no idea.
No, I don't know. This piece of content is brought to you by the fans that support the independent journalism of Moore's Law is Dead on Patreon. And it does need supporting, from personal attacks from tech elites that get mad when we tell you that they are lying to gamers and their own shareholders, to legal attacks from mega corporations that cost the team time and money. This is expensive and often very stressful work. And it's work that doesn't depend on access journalism, nor depend on NDAs or agreements that would sanitize our opinions and hold us back. No, nothing holds us back, and we are independently funded, and we use said funding to do things like pay professional renderers to show you products before they come out, so that the sources that provided us the original pictures don't get in trouble. Or we also create bonus content like Die Shrinks, where you have videos and interviews coming out multiple times a month exclusively to reward our patrons with the extra content that we know they would like to see, whether it's inside scoops or more in-depth conversation and stuff that we just know wouldn't profit if we put it out publicly, but it doesn't need to profit for our fans on Patreon because it is self-funded. And so if you want any of that bonus content, or you want to support the independent journalism of Moore's Law is Dead, or honestly, if you just want to support me, Dan, Gerard, Carbon Cry, or Jesse and Maurice so that we have food on the table every day, consider supporting Moore's Law is Dead on Patreon. And to those that already support us there, I'll see you on the Discord. Jay Buffet writes in and says, hello, I remember the new RAM form factor CAMM Dell made a few years ago as an open format. Is that going to make a comeback as RAM speeds increase, or is that just a spark in the pan? I think you mean flash in the pan. Also, I'm pretty excited for the next two generations of Intel desktop processors. I'm drooling over more PCIe lanes. Would you recommend the refresh or the one that gets the new socket? Also, is the new socket still planned to have a 4-gen lifespan? Well, I don't know about the socket thing. I really brought this up because I haven't really followed CAMM. I know that there's some motherboards, right, that have CAMM RAM support. Do you see that as like being a major part of a future that's larger than it is now? Because like I know Zen 7 should come to AM5. Do you think eventually they'll say, get a CAMM motherboard for the fastest RAM to support this new architecture? Or do you think it's always going to be like a niche thing?
It's hard to say. I mean, speaking to like the motherboard partners, whenever they show off these boards that use it, they seem very keen on it. Like they think it's quite good. Like they're like, yeah, this is a RAM form factor or DRAM form factor that allows us to achieve higher speeds. It's easier for us to, because, you know, motherboard manufacturers are always like, this is the maximum DDR5 speed that we support on our motherboard. And then in practice, it's like that was like an extreme overclocking setting, and it's not really practical for anyone to hit those speeds. Whereas CAMM, the way that they've implemented it, theoretically, it's more achievable, those higher speeds. And so the motherboard makers like it. But of course, the problem there is the lack of being able to buy the DRAM modules. So it's not really a thing that makes sense for consumers right now, just because most consumers, especially today, like struggle to find even just normal DIMMs of DDR5. So trying to introduce a completely different form factor that's only compatible on like a very narrow range of motherboards, it's a pretty hard sell. So I think that's going to be a problem for that form factor until there's like genuine performance benefits that you could show. like obviously they're keen on showing off the speeds, but whether or not that actually translates to X% better for gaming or something, or next generation parts, they can support these speeds, but it's only on CAMM and you do get benefits. Yeah, maybe they'll be able to justify it, but still to this point, it seems like it's more of a sort of prototype slash extreme overclocking type of limited edition sort of thing. And I'm not sure how soon we're going to be seeing that. It might require another like DDR generation, like DDR6 sort of
Mm.
thing. Like once people are sort of accepting that the next generation requires new memory, then you can start messing around with the form factor as well, because obviously the DIMM slots are going to be different for that. And then you can sort of go, well, there's DIMMs, but also there's CAMM. So I think that's probably when we would see it, is they're testing the waters now, and then hopefully in the future at some point they will move towards that once they can sort of justify it to consumers.
Yeah, I haven't really followed CAMM closely at all because of how rarely I see it anywhere is really a factor, and even laptops it's rare. But I never thought about that, because like people will say, well, how can Zen 7 get 32 cores on AM5? And my answer is, well, I mean, what? Zen 3 had 16 cores and Zen 1 had 8. They just probably have a better memory controller. Or I mean, if you have Vcache on there, you don't really need that much fast, or you don't need the RAM to be that fast. But it's an interesting notion, I guess, that with CAMM, perhaps if there was like this 10% difference in performance, they could say, hey, if you have the money, get the CAMM motherboards, and then you can get the faster memory. And that would only be if you get the absolute fastest processor. Anyways, most of the lineup probably wouldn't need that much bandwidth. I guess that's an option, right? But you think it'll probably be still niche like now, right?
Yeah, but it depends on the performance uplift. I mean, if they could show
Sure.
and justify like that it is beneficial, then yeah, there's always going to be a market for high-end shoppers to spend absurd amounts more to get something that gives them 10% more performance. But I think, the way the CPUs work, often having to go into different modes to access even higher frequencies where the latency and things are affected. And yeah, CAM's supposed to, potentially improve that side of things as well. It makes it difficult to sort of justify. Maybe it's 5% faster, but you have to buy an entirely new specific motherboard and source this memory somehow. Yeah, that's a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I guess it would need to justify itself, but I guess you could see maybe a scenario where that happens. All right. And final thing I really wanted to talk to you about is monitors. I mean, I think something I keep trying to remind people is like, well, now GPU prices are going up, but before they were going up as badly, you could say, well, RAM's only a certain percent of your system cost. So overall, this isn't remotely as bad as 2021. I guess we'll see if it does get anywhere near that bad. But one thing that is different, I believe, is not just monitors, but a lot of peripherals. I mean, if people can't build as many systems, and it's not just because of GPUs, it's because of RAM literally making it so you can't build the system. I think monitors are going to be priced pretty dang aggressively, because there'll be less systems being built to go with the new monitor, and therefore they will have to make them very competitive for the people that want them. And I think they look great. I mean, I don't know if you have any thoughts about, you were at CES. I just want to openly ask you, I've seen so many headlines like, here's a 1040, here's a 1080 hertz monitor, here's this glassesless 3D, and then there's the IPS OLED. Like, what impressed you the most about the upcoming monitors for this year at CES?
Yeah, it was a good year for monitors at CES. So that was nice to be able to go around and see a lot of very exciting things. I mean, obviously, continued OLED improvements are going to be probably the biggest headline thing. Like, there's obviously the 39-inch 5K, 2K WOLED from LG Display, which is just a format, like a new format. Love to see new formats. We got like the improvements to RGB stripe for 1440p class QD OLEDs, and LG Display is doing something very similar, but at a 4K resolution. So I think those things, they're sort of maybe on the more minor side of improvements. Like no one was like, oh, that's a game changer. Like I wasn't going to buy one because of that. I mean, there could have been some people that were really put off by that one specific part of it, but overall, OLEDs are still a great technology despite the weird sub-pixel layouts that they used. So there's those things, but I think just in general, the amount of panels that are being made now for OLED introduces massive
Mm.
levels of competition. Like you've got now, WOLED has improved to the point where we're starting to get a lot more glossy options. So that means that, some of the drawbacks people had with that compared to QD-OLED means that there's a lot more reason to buy one or the other. And with more competition means a lot lower prices. And we just see so many manufacturers now, OEMs, making panels using QD-OLED or WOLED. You're going to see prices continue to fall. And they already fall, even just within like a QD-OLED category. Like we saw Black Friday last year in the US, you could get some for like $400 US, like 1440p, 240 hertz, QD-OLED,
Hmm.
$400. Great price. So that's going to be a really big thing to look at across the whole year. Like with all the new panel formats, all the new versions coming in, what does that do across all of those sort of product lines? And the answer is probably things get cheaper as they usually do for monitors, which is good. And then across the rest of the things, like one of the bigger themes at CES was sort of these more higher resolution, higher than 4K resolution gaming
Mm.
monitors using LCD panels. I believe there's also a 5K QD OLED coming at some point, 27 inch. Not sure when that's going to be actually released, but the IPS LCDs that we saw 5K and then Samsung showing off 6K as well.
Hmm.
Certainly interesting. I don't expect them to like go off for gaming, if you know what I mean. Like
Wouldn't you prefer OLED? Like to me, it was like, but if it's not OLED, I would choose that over a higher resolution, wouldn't you?
yeah, I mean, if I was buying a 27 inch or 32 inch for gaming, I would buy an OLED over a 5K or 6K monitor, just because resolution isn't that important for gaming necessarily. 1440p is still fine for 27 inches, and then 32 inch 4K is certainly sufficient. I can see the reason why people would want that panel format, though, especially for productivity, like 5K,
Sure.
6K. 6K, especially at 32 inches, seems pretty nice for productivity use cases. Just the whole able to view native 4K with a UI around it, and you get quite a lot of screen real estate from that sense. Similar with 5K, not quite as much screen real estate. So I think those things, they're going to be useful for some people, but it's really going to depend on their use cases and the sort of things that they prefer, and also the pricing of those panels. I think we're probably going to see them in the $600 to $700 range for the most part, depending on levels of mini LED
For which one?
and stuff like that. So I think Asus was saying their 5K 27 inch is going to be about six to $700.
Okay.
I think MSI, they were saying their mini LED version is going to be, I think, like $800 or $900, and that's like 2,000 zones, glossy panel, 5K. And the dual mode support is decent as well because it's 1440p dual mode.
Yes.
So 1440p is probably going to look pretty good. Not that I had a lot of time to sort of look into that on the show floor, stuff like that. But so it's a very interesting panel. It's just, pricing and competitiveness. And of course, the OLED angle as well. Like once you're in that sort of $600 price range, you're going to be looking at like a 5K LCD versus whatever OLED. You might see 27 inch 4K OLEDs in that range as well. But again, it's like it's options for people. Obviously, they're the people that
Right.
want to deal with burn-in. They're people that want it for productivity. The dual mode support looks quite nice. There's glossy mini LED versions. I don't know. So it seems like it's going to be more compelling than we've seen from some of the other LCDs that are trying to compete in those high tiers. Because obviously 4K, no mini LED is not competitive anymore in those higher tiers. And so now they're moving to some of the things that LCDs can do. So higher densities, that sort of thing, but now at reasonable refresh rates.
Yeah, it's $700. I guess it is still interesting, and it does have dimming zones, so it's not like it's a complete loss when it comes to HDR performance versus OLED. Because I just want to point out, like, just 4 years ago, something like that. Well, first of all, it didn't really exist, but if it would have been like $3,000.
Yeah.
I mean, they were trying to. You remember those ridiculous, like 2 DisplayPort 4K 120,
Yep.
and it has like two grand for that. I think if you're someone who waited, this is quite an exciting year. I have a couple questions though. So about OLED, another Chris writes in and says, I recently bought the MPG 321 URX, and I've never liked the text quality. It burned my eyes. I think I mostly fixed it with software tweaks. However, I still don't think it's as good as a traditional panel. Should I fork over the money for an upgrade to an RGB OLED stripe panel? I saw these headlines. I think I don't know if it was you or someone at CES, and they were talking about stripe. And I'm going to be honest, I didn't get what the complaint was. Like, there's an issue with text on OLED. I have 2 OLED panels right here. My laptop's OLED. I haven't had any issues reading text. I don't actually get it.
Yeah, I think laptop might be a little different because I think some laptops
Sure.
already use RGB stripe. I'm not 100% sure on that, but the panel
Okay.
manufacturing for the laptop panels is a bit different. On the desktop side of things, I think the main complaint has been this is interesting being a 321 URX, so that's a 32-inch 4K. But so QD OLED has used, I describe it as triangle RGB. I don't know what the official name is, but essentially it is one of the subpixels. I think it's green on the top and red and blue on the
Hmm.
bottom, or something like
Sure.
that. Again, you can check the images I've done to see what that looks like.
Oh, right. And like our old IPS panels, like these, a stripe of rectangles or
That's right.
something.
So LCDs for the
Okay.
longest time have been RGB in sort of long rectangles. So within the
Yep.
square pixel, you've got long vertical rectangles of RGB. And what happens with text rendering is because, and this goes back a fair way, in the original days of LCDs, quite low resolution. And so to render text in a way that's more pleasing, they invented subpixel text rendering or subpixel font
Mm.
rendering. So essentially, what that does is it goes, well, we know within the panel that each pixel is actually split into three separate pixels or subpixels of red, green, and blue. So we can manipulate the edges of text and sort of play into that sort of thing where we know how those subpixels are arranged so we can smooth out the edges of text. So instead of just showing one pixel on and then the next pixel off within the text, they can sort of maybe have the blue pixel illuminated slightly more than the green and then the red, and that sort of smooths it out, right? So that was the thinking. And when you take that system and you apply it to a subpixel that isn't the same format, that entire system breaks. So
Hmm.
one of the common issues with IPS LCDs was the BGR format. So this was essentially the panel rotated 180 degrees. So instead of having the red pixel subpixel on the left, you had the blue subpixel on the left. And so with subpixel font rendering, you had to flip the way that it worked. And you can do that using ClearType in Windows, but then again, over time, ClearType has become less and less used. Not every app supports it. So the
Mm.
gold standard has been RGB stripe. When they released QD OLED, they had triangle RGB. So I think it was again green on the top and red and blue on the bottom. That creates problems where you start to see fringing. So at especially on the 1440p panels, if you look closely, there's like pink green fringing. So the top and bottom of text sort of have a slight edge effect on it. And that's because instead of it being arranged RGB in a
Mhm.
vertical layout, it's just different. With WOLED, they've tried all sorts of different things. They had RWBG. So it wasn't RGB, but they also had the G and the B were flipped, and also the introduction of the white subpixel. And then more recently, it's RGWB now. Still has the white subpixel in there. You can get sort of like, because the pixels are sort of split slightly further away and the white is only activated in some scenarios. It's all this complicated stuff. People think it doesn't look as good. I think it doesn't look as good. With the 4K panels, though, the density is high enough in my
I
opinion.
was about to say, if you're high enough density, it minimizes it, right?
Yeah, of course. So the higher the density, the smaller the subpixels are, the lower the gaps are between each pixel. You don't need to rely as much on subpixel rendering. So on the 321 URX, which I also use, I think the quality of text rendering is as good as LCD. Now, does it look exactly the same? Like if you put the two side by side and you're like pixel peeping, does it look the same? No, because it does work differently. But I think, it's interesting that this person has said that they bought it recently. I think if you use it over a long period of time, you will adjust to it over a period of a while. And I use it next to LCDs these days. And I
Mhm.
think it looks pretty much like I don't really notice it anymore. Maybe when I was originally testing it, yes, a little bit, but these days I don't notice it. Definitely still notice it with the 1440p panels though. But
Mm.
then again, like people are sensitive to different sorts of things. So if you're super sensitive to those artifacts, then you might want to wait for an RGB stripe OLED. But the problem is that if you're going from a 32-inch 4K, there's currently no 32-inch RGB stripe OLEDs that I'm aware of panels. They're probably in development, but they're not ready to be released at this point.
I see. Okay. So, because I thought I generally understood it, I just didn't realize it was a thing that was like a big enough deal that people were complaining. But then again, if I think about the OLEDs I've used, it's like, well, okay, that's a TV to play a game or watch Netflix. Oh, no
Mhm.
text. Or like I have a 4K 27-inch, probably dense enough laptop. Well, it's a 14-inch screen and it's 1800p. And like you said, it might already use Stripe anyway. So, yeah, it's kind of like lower res, larger OLED is kind of where it's popping up a lot.
Yeah, and it's not a problem in games because you're not
Of
using,
course, yeah.
like, games don't bother figuring out where the subpixels are to sort of render. Maybe they will at some point, but at the moment they don't bother with that. So yeah, it's not, if you're largely playing games, and even apps outside of text like icons and stuff don't look weird in my opinion on those panels. It's mostly just the subpixel font rendering is trying to do something. It's trying to adjust the way that text looks based on a format that is not actually being used on that panel. And you can turn off like subpixel font rendering, but that can make text look weird in other ways. So it's kind of, it's a trade-off that's not necessarily optimal, but it's a thing that the OLED panel manufacturers are aware of. And I think over the next couple of years, we will see pretty much all of the panels transition to using the RGB stripe. I think it was just manufacturing reasons why the other subpixel formats were a bit easier, especially because, with QD-OLED in particular, the sizes of the different subpixels are different because they have different emissive properties and things like that. So to get each of the subpixels to be identical in size is a challenge. It's not straightforward. And even what you see with the QD-OLED V-stripe, each of the subpixels is still slightly different in size. It's just that they've now arranged them in the correct order. So that's been a problem for them, but they're solving these things and they're definitely aware of it.
Unique Name writes in and says, first time asking a question. I never heard of RGB mini LED until Tim went to HKC's booth at CES. I'm really interested in alternatives to OLED for workstation use. So what do you think of the future of this RGB mini LED tech that big companies like Samsung, Sony, and LG are also working on? And how competitive do you think it is or can be to OLED based on what you know so far? And specifically with his question too, I'm just curious like where you think OLED is right now versus the best of the best, mini LED with a bunch of dimming zones. Because I have to say, and this is of course not a monitor, but I recently went into a Best Buy and I'm sorry, like I see Samsung over here still trying to convince people to pay the same amount of money for their non-OLED TVs. And then right next to it is the LG booth. And I'm like, across the store, I can see this looks wildly better, in my opinion, for watching stuff. So like, where do you think OLED is versus these other technologies and quality?
Yeah, so I mean, with RGB mini LED, I mean, it's just a different version of mini LED LCDs. It's not, I wouldn't say, getting closer to competing with OLED. It's just trying to do the mini LED backlighting differently. So it's not micro LED. It doesn't have RGB elements for each individual pixel. They're just now able to control the backlight zones. Instead of producing white out of a backlight, you can now produce red, green, and blue, or any color, depending on the color that is being shown. And the main benefit there, at least being claimed by people like HKC and the TV manufacturers, is increased color volume, which, I mean, yeah, I guess color volume might have been a concern with older LCDs, but it was always at the level of OLED. You're only improving it further. It's not like they needed to catch up with RGB mini LED technology. I mean, this is just like I don't know how good it's going to be in terms of like when you test it. They're claiming 100% Rec 2020, which is quite interesting. But yeah, for gaming and stuff like that, I'm not sure how relevant it is. I think with OLED as a whole, I think mini LED is probably more competitive in the TV side of things, just because you're looking at relatively low speed motion for a lot of like movies and TV stuff, like especially because it's all largely like 24 or 30 FPS. They're not doing crazy movements and things like that. So the speed benefit of OLED is a little bit diminished on a TV. I mean, it still has benefits, of course, but it's not a key selling point for a TV. And then in a lot of use cases, a TV is probably going to be used in a living room with sun and stuff like that, where brightness can be important. And those are the two real advantages that LCDs have. So it does make some sense for TVs, but for monitors, like I find it hard at the same price point to sort of justify even mini LED LCDs. Like OLEDs, there's just so many benefits for gamers that it is, in my opinion, the clearly superior technology. That's not to say that there's no reason, there's still reasons to buy mini LED LCDs. Like if you need certain things, you need brightness, you need productivity, application use, not having to worry about burn-in, that sort of thing, then yeah, of course, LCDs are going to be the better choice. They're now going to be available in 5K and 6K options. So there's going to be that as well to consider. And so, yeah, there's still reasons to buy them. It's just that OLED for gaming, because it's so much faster, it supports higher refresh rates. Generally, it's easier to access higher refresh rates with an OLED than with an LCD. and then all the contrast benefits for HDR and stuff like that. And even with motion with HDR with dimming is challenging because you have to figure out, with LCDs, when are you enabling the zones in a fast moving scene? How are you going to, how fast are you going to manipulate that backlight? With OLEDs, that's not really a challenge. And it's not as much of a challenge with LCDs, again, for TVs, because you're often doing like flick shots and stuff where if you see a fast moving bright object, it can flicker on many LEDs. It's not really something you see in movies, but on gaming, obviously it's a problem. So yeah, I think OLEDs pretty much going to dominate, the higher tier stuff for the next little while. And LCDs is effectively the cheaper option in some ways. That does have some benefits, as I've said, but I think over time we will see most gaming monitors move towards OLED. And we're certainly seeing from, $500 up. If you have that amount of money to spend, most of the time you would just be purchasing an OLED, and pricing is continuing to come down. So eventually the vast majority of panels will be OLED, I would think. Whether or not they get to, because 1440p LCD is like $150, we're probably still a fair way off that, but it's improving.
Carbon writes in, Tim, have you heard about inkjet OLED or Gen 11 OLED production? These have been coming soon for years and yet keep getting postponed.
Yeah, not really. I don't tend to look too much into like next generation display panel technology because, again, like you sort of said, they tease these sorts of things and then it's years away from actually being released. So I tend to stick largely to just like what are the current technologies and what's like imminently coming, just because, I don't want to be recommending people to buy something and then, oh, hang on, there's a panel that's coming out in like 6 months that's going to solve all of these problems and improve all of these things. So yeah, I think that those technologies that are being talked about are probably, destined for TVs first. That's usually where they put those things in first, and then monitors eventually. As far as I'm aware from Samsung Display and LG Display, there's no current plans to drastically change the way that these panels are produced. The roadmaps are largely just small iterations and changes to the current technology. So that would be things like we've got tandem W OLED, but now using that as an RGB stripe instead of the previous version, or now offering glossy W OLED options, or for QD OLEDs, small improvements to brightness, and they change the emissive layers a bit here and there as well, but no drastic changes. I'm not aware of any drastic changes in the pipeline for monitors.
Yeah, I mean, an example I always bring up is I think LG showed off their first like OLED monitor, or TV, I should say, in like 2012 or 2014. And then it became wait for OLED. And this was compounded by the PlayStation Vita having OLED. So everyone's like, oh, maybe it is really around the corner for everything else. And it wasn't until 2018 or 19 that they actually had something for a reasonable price you could buy. So I'm always very skeptical when new panel, like truly new panel types are announced. Like, what was it? Not mini LED, or maybe it was that, like, I know Samsung was showing off these like 300-inch, $80,000 TVs.
Yeah, the micro
was that
LED stuff.
Micro LED.
Yep.
I think I've been getting questions, when is micro LED going to be ready, since I started Moore's Law is Dead. So, I mean, it still isn't there. So I don't know. Stuff takes a very long time. AI generated fish writes in and says, hi Tim, I bought an MSI MPG 321 URX based on your recommendation. Recently my power button broke off. Have you experienced physical durability issues with monitors during testing?
Not in terms of breaking them during use. That's pretty uncommon. I've had a few that have been shipped to me and they broke during shipping. So that has happened. Sure. A few dead on arrivals because of broken panels. I think I've broken, like sometimes it's not like a power button, but obviously when you're lifting a monitor, there's certain points that make sense to grab onto. And sometimes monitor manufacturers make those areas weaker than others. So I have broken like plastic panels and stuff before, lifting them and moving them around, but no like power button, like, because that's obviously going to cause a problem for you trying to use the monitor. I don't think I've done stuff like that. There's certain products that, like we were testing last year, the Asus 540 hertz W OLED, which has a clear exterior on the back. Like it just looks unique, interesting. It's gray sort of overall. But the transparent housing that they've used is actually quite a bit weaker than the other housings that they used to use, like the opaque gray box version. When they moved to the translucent one, I guess they had to remove some of the support structures inside. So if you sort of trying to
Right.
jam the cable in at the bottom, like the DisplayPort cable, and you're sort of holding the top of the monitor, that part of the plastic is actually quite weak. So I could imagine people potentially breaking that if they use too much force. So there's things like that that I've seen over the years, but it's not like, I just use monitors and then, oops, the stand's broken now or something like that. That's pretty rare. They're usually pretty good these days, especially now that we're seeing these sort of flat metal stands and stuff. Pretty hard to break those sorts of things.
Yeah, a solid chunk of metal. It's like what's, really going to break. All right. Final question. Pollard writes in and says, question for Tim, as 2026 should be the year to buy new monitors. Look, I have a 120 hertz IPS 27-inch 4K monitor. I bought it back in 2021, and I have to say that these new OLEDs are looking very attractive. In your opinion, is this the year to upgrade my visual experience? And if so, which monitor in this class got you excited the most at CES?
Yeah, is this the year? I don't know how much better it will be than last year, but certainly the this year and last year are going to be very good times to upgrade to OLEDs. And I mean, if you do it now, it's probably going to be cheaper than last year. So I guess that is a benefit. So yeah, I mean, if you're on a 120 hertz IPS LCD and you're moving to an OLED, great time to upgrade. I think these days, especially for the 27-inch monitors, they're down now to $700 to $800 US. There's the Alienware like AW2725Q, I think.
I have that. That's what I'm using right now.
Usually pretty good value. And obviously the 32-inch models, again, even the new ones are launching in that sort of like $900 range. And I think the cheapest ones are in that sort of bit lower than that as well. So that's going to be a really good upgrade, especially if you bought that 4K monitor for productivity as well as gaming. I would imagine that's probably the reason that you would have bought a 27-inch 4K previously. And then, yeah, HDR and all that sort of thing is going to be pretty big. If you're already on an OLED, it's going to be very different. I think there's probably no real reason to upgrade if you're already on that sort of technology. Even with like the biggest change that I've sort of seen is between that first generation 34-inch ultra wide to the very current generation, where they sort of went from first gen QD OLED to now whatever generation they're up to. Improve the screen coding, RGB stripe, higher refresh rate. Even that is like, and it's brighter as well. Even that is like, it's definitely a better monitor. It's definitely a better panel. I swapped my Alienware out for one of those just the other day because it is better, but would you pay the money to upgrade? Probably not. So that's currently where I would sort of see things. Yeah, certainly for LCDs, this is going to be a great year to upgrade. But if you're sort of more in that budget class buyer, like you would normally spend $200-$300, I think you'll see quite a few more mini LED options. Like you might be able to go from 27-inch 1440p, no HDR to that sort of panel, but with mini LED backlighting, which may be attractive depending on what you're after. But yeah, largely we're sort of looking at that continued OLED transition for people. And since there are so many panel formats now available for people, there's quite a lot of choice. This year you'll see the 27-inch 4K W OLED with RGB stripe coming out. So that'll be an option potentially. And then better ultra-wide formats, more of the 32-inch and 27 inches at different resolutions and things like that. So yeah. And as I said, doesn't seem to be too many like major panel changes in the immediate roadmap. There's that 27-inch 5K panel at some point, but I don't think we'll be seeing like, 8K, 40-inch panels or something crazy like that in the immediate future. So I think you'll be pretty safe if you upgrade now. It's not like it's going to be immediately superseded, which I think is also sort of an important point to sort of look at. You don't want to buy something and then it to be, pretty much immediately obsolete. So I think a lot of the panels and stuff that's available this year will be pretty sort of safe bets, which is good.
Yeah, unfortunately, all of those gamers that bought the 3090 to play in 8K will still have to keep waiting to be able to buy 8K panels. But yeah, I mean, I would say, just to put things in perspective, I keep bringing this up because it happened to me recently, but I had a 2021 4K 120 IPS monitor break recently. I got it for like $900 4 years ago. And then I was like looking, this is just my side monitor. Like, do I really need to spend $500 on some OLED gaming thing? And I found like a Dell 4K 120 IPS monitor for like $200 on Black Friday. And I was like, oh, so what I paid $900 for is now like close to $200. I think it's now back up to close to $300, but still like a third the price of what I paid 4 years ago. I would say to this person, that's where your monitor is now. Your monitor that I know it was expensive, right? And to be fair to yourself, it would have been twice that price the year before or something. But now that's like the budget range. And so think of like what you can get now for not even what you used to pay, but for like $700. I've had OLED TVs and laptops around for a while, but the first like OLED monitor I used was sent to me by KTC, I think a year ago or two. And it was a 1440p, 240 hertz OLED. And I just used it as my main one to see, like, kind of play around like 4K, like 120 versus 1440p, 240. And even if I was CPU bottlenecked, I found that I would rather game with an OLED in 1440p at the same frame rate than a 4K. Like, that is just how much better OLED is. And so if you could afford to pay what I presume was $700 to $1,000 or more for that IPS 4K monitor 4 years ago, you don't even need to spend that much now to get something that I think is still better at a lower resolution. So I think, assuming you still have the same job or whatever, like, you will notice the difference big time.
Yeah, 100%.
Going to OLED.
Yeah, monitors is one of the only product categories in PC gaming that is getting much cheaper year on year. Everything else is pretty much going the other way. But there's so much competition with monitors that we actually see the benefits of that across pretty much all of the different price points and that sort of thing. Like, most OLEDs are manufactured by two panel manufacturers. They're still extremely competitive, especially because a lot of the other brands are developing OLED technology as well. So, hey, the benefits of competition, you see that in full force in monitors, and then on things like CPUs, GPUs, and all that, it's a little different. More monopolies there, which makes, unfortunately, the experience a bit worse for people. But, when you get competition, it really does work.
And on that note, I think we will end the episode. Tim, once again, I want to thank you so much for coming on. You already plugged it, but let's plug it one more time. Please tell everybody where to find you and where to find things that you want them to find.
Yeah, well, you can obviously find most of our content on Hardware Unboxed. Monitors stuff is on Monitors Unboxed. And we've also got a podcast, the Hardware Unboxed podcast. You can just search for any of those things and you'll find all of our content. So, if you're interested in PC gaming, we tend to have you covered on a lot of the product recommendations. But products are probably, it's going to be an interesting year for that. You might see a bit more game coverage from us throughout 2026. But you never know. Worth subscribing. Check it out. See what you like.
And of course, also, those will all be in the description. Monitors Unboxed, the podcast, and this channel. Also, please make sure that you're subscribed to Moore's Law is Dead. Ring the bell button. Comment below. Like the video. I guess on mobile, there's something called Hype Points. Do that. And then, of course, check out Broken Silicon, your podcast app of choice, and consider supporting us on Patreon to ask us, like Tim, questions. All right. Tim, one more time, thank you for coming on. And everybody else, thank you for watching and thank you for listening. Have a good week.
Thank you.
This podcast was brought to you by the YouTube channel and website Moore's Law is Dead. Moore's Law is Dead and Broken Silicon are trademarks of their creator, Tom. That guy is me, and I am indeed the creator, editor, writer, and showrunner of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, videos, articles, and other media. However, it's not just me. Moore's Law is Dead is a team, with Broken Silicon co-hosted by my brother Dan, audio editing by Gerard Cortez, renders being done by the industrial designer Jean-Philippe Clermont, and special assistance is also provided by Carbon Cry and Kerry No Sugata as well. Find all of our information at www.mooreslawsdead.com on the About/Support page in the event you do want to hire me for consulting work, hire Gerard for audio work, hire Jean-Philippe for industrial design work, or you're interested in working with Carbon Cry or Kerry No Sugata as well. You can also find our long-term sponsors on that page if you want to show them some love for putting food on our tables. Or you can also mail us some love. You can send letters or hardware donations to the following address: Moore's Law is Dead, P.O. Box 60632 in Nashville, Tennessee, zip code 37206. Although, to be honest, the best way to show Moore's Law is Dead some love is to support us on Patreon. Patrons are what makes Moore's Law is Dead content truly
possible. Every month, and really every day, depending on who you're talking about, me, Gerard, Dan, and Jean-Philippe are working tirelessly to provide a steady stream of content that we could not keep doing unless we knew the work was possible without being reliant on sponsors dictating every little thing we put out. Don't get us wrong, we love our sponsors, but we love directly working for you, our fans, much more. If you have any extra money, even a couple free dollars a month, consider supporting us directly on Patreon. Those couple of monthly dollars will get you access to the exclusive podcast Die Shrink, voting on subjects of future podcast episodes, the ability to ask guests questions, and of course, access to the Moore's Law is Dead Discord full of like-minded people who I am sure would love to meet you. I am one of them. Additionally, higher tiers get access to early, ad-free episodes of Broken Silicon, the ability to ask questions in all Broken Silicon episodes and Loose Ends live streams ahead of the recording, and the entire back catalog of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, in addition to having thanks in the credits of videos and podcasts depending on the tier, with other perks available as well. And hey, if you cannot afford to support us directly every month, please do share Moore's Law is Dead videos and podcasts with friends and family, and on social media and websites like Reddit, and give Broken Silicon a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast app of choice. All of this does really help us so much. But like I said, this podcast would not be possible without the patrons directly providing predictable and reliable support every month. And so now it is time to give a personal thanks to the greatest of the fans. The following supporters are at the 10 gigahertz or higher supported levels:
Brad Medlin, Drita Foles, Z Jits, Daniel D, Nicholas Buckner, Deke, Toka, Aaron Close, Jan Rauner, MJB1, Daniel Hyde, GZ Ziggy, SNES Chalmers, Jim Ferreira, Valko Malev, Jensen Wang, Sarcastro, Compressed AI Blocks, Chris Rich, Evan Dingle, Hal Booma, Shredbird, Sammy Malas, Chrysanthenos, Curry King 3, The Boss Haas, Tommy, Jonathan, Jake Dude 23, Jake Martin, Zlicky, Gamers Unite, Ian Clifford, Mead and Pork, Tim Robb, Travis Gooding, Amiable Chief, Winwing, Aisha, Zoot Taylor, Mads, Patty Cakes, Greg, Michael McGee, Stephen Coates, Mark Mitchell, James Anderson, Mark Raidmaker, Salty Internet Pirate, Henry Zhang, Wesley Sager, Cameron, Michelle Pell, Hexapuma, Tika Autumn, Reginald Ari, Matthew Cassels, Windstar, Little Germany, James Irader, Shay Milton, Brett Jones, Chuck Glidden, Stephen Dick, Mac Daffy, Justin Bussell, Austin Haggerty, Joe Foot, Brian Scanlon Hardland, Brian Wright, Slushbot, Jansen Angima, John Swin, The Forbidden Juice, RB Racer, Dan M, Bing Bong 3, Solarized 80, Elbergun, Keekum, Sprutnik, Brian P, Hudat 42, Cornster 671, Penta Winta, Omega Doge, Huger, Ander, Kiwi, Mr. Tiger, John Wick, Boomstick, Penguins, Love AI, Porcelain Oats, Smash Axley, Nick Zuzmania, Charles Russell, Karim Al Masri, AI Soldier 789, Rye Hill, Chi Bowles, Bespoke exclamation point, Mad Nolis, Reg Kusis, Kevin Coots, Fred Berger, Jonathan Harris, Kylene Reichel, Kainush Kagani, Johnny Trans, Zuber, Ahmed, Josh, Arkeo, RK0, Zephyrin, Angel of Cake, and of course, thank you to Sahara for the music.